works to their advantage. And so as they come up against West Virginia soon, I like them. I like their odds. I think that Syracuse has a really, really good chance of going very far. And like you said, if I was going to pick an 11-12 seed, I would probably pick them, not to diss on North Texas. I think that North Texas played a great game against Purdue, but I'm not sure that they have it in them to continue that run. Like, it was a really good game, but I'm not sure that it's forever for them. I'm not sure that it's going to last into these next couple rounds.
No, yeah, and the thing about Syracuse in that zone, it's so hard to prepare for because, I mean, now they're going to play this weekend. They're playing like 2 days. So that's a really tough for the team they're playing to come up there. I think it's Houston, not Houston, excuse me, Rutgers, I think. They're going to come up in there. And again, it's really difficult for a team 2 days to prepare for a 2-3 zone. And maybe they never played that zone at all the whole season. So that's something that I think for them, especially those, like when you see the 64 and then 32, that's going to be really difficult for them to, defend. And I mean, the way they're shooting and the way they're defending. And I mean, that's something they're going to be a team that will be really, really hard to beat. And then Oregon State, I really like Oregon State because also they're playing some, hot basketball. They played really well in the Pac-12 tournament, won that. And now, you're talking about Cade Cunningham. I mean, look, he's a great player, but this team has so much depth. Everyone's playing their best basketball at the right time. And that's how you beat one player. Because, I mean, if you can stop Cade Cunningham, you can stop Oklahoma State. And I think that this Oregon State team can do it because of that.
Yeah, and I would also say this, as an 11 seed, you would think these double-digit seeds, usually they're mid-major teams that are Cinderellas, but as Syracuse, they're from a Power 5 conference. It's not your traditional Cinderella. That's the reason why the last 2 times that Syracuse has been a double-digit seed, the last time they were 11 seed, they got to the Sweet 16. When they were a 10 seed a couple of years back before that, they get to the national semifinal. So they're not your traditional Cinderella. And I can tell you this, I'm sure Bob Huggins in West Virginia have to be furiated that in the round of 32, they have to see this team. And I will say, while Syracuse's defense, that can frustrate people, Huggy and that West Virginia defense, they're no slouches themselves. That's going to be a battle in the trenches. And I can imagine they will be putting bodies on Buddy Boeheim and Girard, not making it as easy as San Diego State made it. But Kayla, that's the thing. When you have a team like Syracuse, a team like UCLA, they're an 11 seed. When you have non-traditional teams down there in the double digits, they can do damage just because usually they're not down that far. And when you get that opportunity, most of them make the most of it. And that's what Syracuse done in recent history.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I mean, they're not your traditional Cinderella. And I like UCLA. You mentioned UCLA. I do like their chances. I mean, against Texas, not that I don't know that they're going to do it, but I think they're going to make a really great game out of it. And I do also feel kind of obligated as a New Jerseyan to talk about Rutgers here, making it, winning. Yeah. I'm excited for them. I think that they played a good game against Clemson. I'm not sure it's enough for Houston, but I do like Rutgers. And we had talked about a little bit before the show, just all of these Big Ten teams. I think the Big Ten had 9 teams in the tournament this year, which is a crazy amount, but so many of them are already out. I mean, there's I guess 3, but upsets and things that you were not expecting out of the Big Ten.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you, Andrew, for correcting me with the West Virginia playing Syracuse. Yes. Just wanted to say that out quickly. Wasn't 100% sure about that. And I do want to move to talk about the Big Ten because it's so interesting because you talk about Rutgers and they had a great win. You had the Illini look really good. They ran right through their 16 seed matchup. But then you have the 2 big upsets were also from the Big Ten. And it's just, I guess some teams excel by playing that grueling schedule and then getting just all of that, experience in. But it's really difficult. You just look at Ohio State. They struggled with it. Purdue, they were met with some pushback. So they ended up struggling going to OT. Both of those games went to OT, I believe, too. So, I mean, I guess once you play all those games, I think it's interesting because I guess some teams, they excel in it and they're able to, play that hard Big Ten schedule. And then they really feel like they're ready. And other teams, maybe then you look at fatigue factor in teams like, those North Texases or the Oral Roberts, they've been, really, I mean, they went through their tournament, they won usually like a week in advance. So they've been resting really. And it's interesting because I think that dynamic, you have some teams that got upsetted and then you had some teams that looked really, really good too. So again, the Big Ten, I think is an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, it's tough to discern, what to make out of it because like you said, the Illini, they looked really good. Wisconsin, they looked really good. They dismantled UNC and Baylor. I think for what Wisconsin has with their size and the fact that they can shoot the three just as good as Baylor can, that could be trouble for the Bears. And then, on the other side, Ohio State, Purdue, they kind of just disappoint and they don't play at the level that we expect them to play, or as you mentioned, the level that we've seen in such a grueling conference. But Kayla, could it even be the fact that I think some of these Big Ten teams feel like when they come into that, first round matchup, they might feel a little bit overconfident. Like, yeah, we're from the Big Ten. We've gone against the best teams. We're the best conference in America. So when we go against a North Texas or an Oral Roberts, we're not necessarily scared of them. We're not intimidated. We feel like we're going to win that game. It's hard to conclude that because we don't know what we can't get into the players and the coaches' minds, but you got to think that plays a factor where maybe that overconfidence can kind of lead to just some sluggish play just because you think that you can flip the switch and then you can just turn it up. Just like we saw, a Syracuse or Arkansas, when they got into trouble against Colgate, they just turned it on, flipped the switch. But not every team can do that. And we saw with Purdue and Ohio State, they tried flipping the switch, but it was just a little bit, a little bit too late. And now they're going home early.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is like a sort of swagger, I would say, associated with the Big Ten. I think a lot of teams in it probably think that they are some of the best teams, which is true. But because of their schedule, they think it's probably easy money to come right in and take one of these lower teams that people don't really hear about. Yeah. They don't get a lot of news coverage, and they're a team that does. And so I think that maybe they do come in a little sluggish, a little expecting an easier time. And so then they are surprised when that does not happen. And I also think that it could be a case of like burnout in that they do play, like we had talked about with Ohio State. They had a lot really tough games, like 3 in a row, I think you guys said. And so it could just be a case of once all 3 Big Ten teams lost in overtime. So any of the Big Ten teams that lost went to overtime and then they lost. And so I think that kind of speaks to the fact that they just maybe didn't have enough endurance for this, enough stamina. They worked a lot throughout this season. It was a really weird, disrupted one because of pandemic, and they maybe didn't get to play as much as they normally do, or their schedule was a little stranger. And so I think that once it came into that overtime, like you had said, Posadas, they couldn't turn it on. They could not ramp up their momentum and ramp up their level of play in order to win the game and do what they wanted. So they started out slow, they dug themselves into a hole, and then they didn't have the endurance to get themselves all the way back up. And so I don't know if that maybe we're always overhyped the Big Ten, or maybe they just are tired this year. I'm not entirely sure what it says about the conference as a whole, but I do think that it could speak to perhaps an overconfidence in it.
I mean, they got so many teams in the tournament too. So it's like, when you look at it, I mean, if they have 9 teams in, if only 3 teams get knocked out, I guess it's not too bad. But also, I think it comes back to the teams that won. You have some lower seeds that won, like Wisconsin. They're a team that, I mean, you look at them against Baylor. I mean, Baylor, I think a lot of people kind of thought if there was going to be a 1 seed go out early, it could be them. And the way Wisconsin played, I mean, I can definitely see an upset in the round of 32 between Wisconsin and Baylor. And that's one that I'm circling. I really want to watch. And Wisconsin, they have all of that tournament experience. Talk about, you always feel like you see Wisconsin going deep, Elite 8, Final 4. And they're a team that, I would love to see, maybe make an upset. And then you look at Rutgers, I hope it's not really a Cinderella story, but I hope that they continue to play well. Just the way that program is really turned around. It's something that I would love to see them go forward. And Syracuse too. I mean, another big conference team playing as a double-digit seed. Maybe that they feel like, look, we're playing in these hard conferences and a lot of teams are disrespecting us. And, especially when you look at the Big Ten and like a team like Rutgers, a team like Wisconsin, they're like in the middle and they had such a hard time winning in the Big Ten. But now you get a little easier competition and you're obviously really motivated. You got knocked out early in the tournament, so maybe endurance isn't such a big thing. I would definitely look at those 2 teams for sure when looking at the tournament too.
Yeah, and how about Wisconsin in today's basketball and in college where it's one and dones? You get the young guys, and that's what you roll with. I think the average age of the Badgers, like 22 and a half years. So, I mean, ancient in basketball when you got guys, a bunch of upperclassmen, and then especially when you have, Reavers inside, the way he can just protect the rim. And then you have that guard in Demetric Trice, he just makes things happen. Every time he takes that step back shot or he pulls up, you just think it's going in. And that's what I mentioned, having the recipe. Do you have the ingredients, the recipe to make a deep run? I would also say, aside from Baylor, I think Michigan, we're talking a Big Ten team that could be in trouble. That 8-9 matchup, and I love St. Bonaventure I'm an A-10 guy, and I love the Bonnies this year, but I think LSU, that's just a bad matchup. LSU was really good, and they were a tipping away from beating Bama and being the SEC champs. So I think if LSU can get past the Bonnies, I think Michigan could be in trouble without Livers. I mean, Dickinson's going to have to work. I mean, he's going to have to be that guy. But when you think about Cam Thomas, Watford, Javante over there for LSU, there's a lot of talent there, and that's a team that could find themselves in the Sweet 16 as well as Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think that Michigan, like statistically, Michigan is the number one seed that people had going the shortest, that they did not have them going very far. And I agree with that. I don't know that I trust them fully to go that far. I feel like they are kind of hit or miss occasionally, a little bit of inconsistency with them. And so I do think that a team like LSU or maybe even Georgetown, I'm a little high on Georgetown right now. I don't know, but they're kind of my 12 seed that I kind of like. And so it's hard to say. Maybe one of these teams could take out Michigan earlier. I have Baylor going farther than I have Michigan, I think.
Yeah, very interesting. And talk about LSU, they score with everybody. I mean, they can score. They almost knocked off Alabama in that SEC championship game. That was one for the ages, really good game. And I mean, they got so many players. That's going to be a tough out just because they have all that depth scoring wise. But I think that will wrap up our conversation on the NCAA tournament. So much more just in the next few weeks. And it's going to be so much fun. And I really can't wait to keep watching all these games. It's definitely one of the best times of the year. Next, we're going to get into our first headline segment. Andrew's going to join us for that. And definitely that will be a very interesting conversation about the men's and women's tournaments, then also Deshaun Watson as well. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Quarter to midnight here. This is One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. As the great Scott Van Pelt would say, I'm not tired yet. Neither is Andrew Gullotta or Kayla Wentzel. So let's get into our first headline segment, shall we? And I want to stick with the NCAA tournament, Gullotta and Kayla, but more so what's happening off the court, the big news. I was on Twitter, and obviously I'm filling out a bracket and just paranoid about what I'm going to pick. But Thursday night, Oregon forward Sidonia Prince had posted a photo showing the disparity between the weight rooms for the women's teams down in San Antonio as opposed to the men's tournament in Indianapolis, with just single dumbbells. From there, we saw more people come over and send pictures, videos in the next day or two showing the disparity in accommodations, facilities, meals, etc. NCAA Vice President Dan Gavitt apologized Friday, said the NCAA, quote, fell short. NCAA President Mark Emmert said that due to COVID-19, there was less communication and collaboration between the men's and women's committees, although he did end up saying that it's still no excuse and that the NCAA dropped the ball here on how they dealt with the women's tournament as opposed to the men's. Kayla, I want to start with you first. What was your initial reaction watching or seeing these photos, seeing these clips, and just knowing that we're still here in a place where women's sports is getting the short end of the straw as opposed to their male counterparts?
Yeah. I wish I could say that I was surprised, but I'm not. I'm not surprised by this at all. I'm disappointed, absolutely, but I'm not surprised. I think that it's clear in the way that the NCAA markets both of these tournaments. I think that it's very clear that they clearly place the men's tournament over higher precedence and higher priority than the women's tournament. I mean, they're not even airing, I think we had talked about this the other day, they're not even airing the women's games until maybe the Sweet 16 on ESPN, but otherwise they're confined to like ESPN2, ESPN3. And so I think that this is just kind of, I was expecting this because of the way that they don't market the women's tournament. And so the NCAA, for all of their apologies, probably only care about money, and they don't market their women's teams enough to make enough money off of them. So they probably don't care enough about their resources. And so I'm disappointed for them. I think that this is a terrible treatment. The women's, I don't know why that they would be any different. But I think that the NCAA, and especially their apology saying it was COVID and so they miscommunicated. I mean, come on, that's not real. You know what I mean? Like, everyone can communicate now. There is no reason for miscommunications anymore because we are so connected towards one another that's definitely just some excuse that they are like their PR team told them to say. But like we saw it in food, we saw it in merchandise, we saw it in weight room, like in every aspect. The women's teams were receiving less than the men's. And so that's not a miscommunication. That's a system of women being under prioritized.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, a miscommunication. I guess they didn't miscommunicate with the men's and they got all their, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that just seemed like an excuse that, they're trying to cover their behinds almost. And, I feel like when you're looking at this, did the NCAA really think like when they set it all up, like, oh, this is okay? Like, I mean, I don't know how, like, when you just like look at it and you're someone, overseeing the events, you're like, this probably isn't right. If you're just looking at it from, setting it up. And I just don't understand why nobody stepped in to try to, give the more resources to the women. And, when you talk about that and the marketing of the game, it's obviously less. And just going to a team that does get marketed a lot, a team like UConn, that women's team, the amazing program they've built. You look at, in UConn and, people around, my roommates from Connecticut, and like the UConn women are just, the talk of the town, even more than the men's team, because they're given, all their games are televised, all their games are on TV. And you see that team is just so popular. So, that's almost like a test case where it almost comes down to resources. And it's just another kind of example. And it's kind of a blatant example for the NCAA not giving the equal resources between the men and the women.
Yeah, here's the deal. It just feels like the NCAA, when everything was canceled last year, the NCAA, it really looks like their top priority was making sure the men's tournament went off without a hitch. That was it, because they announced that tournament first. And I think they waited like a month to then announce the women's tournament. So they were all focused on making sure, all right, let's get a city, Indianapolis, make sure all the teams are good, accommodated for. Let's worry about that. And then when we have extra time, then we can worry about the women's teams and what we do with them. Let's put them in San Antonio. But when you consider that the men are getting catering style food, the women are getting frozen food or stuff that's already been prepackaged. The men are able to play in places like Mackey, where Purdue is at, or in Bloomington, where the Hoosiers play, or in Hinkle, or even in Lucas Oil Stadium, where the Colts play. It's not even a basketball arena. And some of these women's teams, they're going to have to play in a rec center somewhere outside of San Antonio. It's absolutely egregious. And truthfully, it's disgraceful on the NCAA's part, considering that women's basketball, if you gave it, and I promise you this, if you put a women's basketball tournament game in between two men's tournament games and you gave them that national coverage on CBS, TNT, TBS, and True TV, they would draw similar numbers. Women's basketball is popular. I don't get, I think in social media, people are always trying to downplay women's sports, but in Europe, women's basketball is incredibly popular. It just seems like only here in the States does women's basketball not get its just due, because it's not like the men's game. There aren't people dunking. The athleticism isn't there. Like, if that's the only thing with basketball, it's about skill and players who understand the game, and women's basketball absolutely exudes that, Kayla. And it's just, to me, it's unfathomable, but this is where we're in. Women's sports still has so much further to go before they get that equality that they so much deserve.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's all throughout. It is like a full system of undermining women's sports. And so like the WNBA, like, they do not get nearly as much television coverage as the NBA. And so I think that what it really is to me is that it starts with television. I mean, it probably starts lower than that, but it ends with television maybe. And that the fact that women never even get an opportunity to be on national TV, that women never even get an opportunity to try to draw a crowd. Like, I think that you tweeted it, Andrew, and it was something like, women could draw such a national attention and they could be as big as the men's March Madness tournament, but nobody ever gives them this opportunity. Nobody ever gives them the television coverage. And so it's not a lack of the public wanting to watch women's sports. I think it's a lack of television executives signing on to airing women's sports, because I know that if they put that on at the same time slot as the NBA and they put on the WNBA or something, that it would draw the same crowd. It would draw a same amount of viewership. But it's rather the point that no television executive does it. Nobody ever puts the women's league, the women's NCAA tournament onto the same level. And it's outrageous to me, actually, because the NCAA must have thought they were going to get away with it. I don't know why they never thought that somebody would post about it. I guess they just assumed that the women wouldn't make a big deal that they were getting less than the men. Like, they consciously gave them less resources and then just assumed that they wouldn't have to make a public apology about it. Like, that type of like arrogance is so outrageous to me, that they said that, like, that they made it seem like, oh, well, we'll just give the women less and then they're not going to talk about it to anybody and they're not going to call us on it. Like, it was that arrogance, which was so like upsetting to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, like, did they think it was going to be okay? It makes no sense. And just like, I mean, talking about the TV and stuff, I believe the women's NCAA tournament goes to ESPN, so they have the rights to the game. And I believe the NIT, the men's NIT, has the, they're also on ESPN. I'm just like, who wants to watch the NIT? I mean, I'm sorry, but like,
nobody.
No one cares. And even like, I mean, the players, I know some of the players care probably, I mean, depending on the tournaments, but it's not the same level. Like, you're playing for a national championship. And, whether it's men's or women's, you get the heart, the same. It's the same. And everyone's going to want to watch people that care and want to win a national tournament, want to create a legacy at a school. And when you're playing the NIT, which no one really cares about, no one cares if you have an NIT banner hanging up in your gym. Everyone cares about the NCAA. I mean, why aren't they on instead of, this second place tournament for them? I mean, because that's really what it is. It's second place, and just makes no sense why, the women's NCAA tournament isn't on compared to an NIT tournament. Just, I don't know, it's a disconnect for me.
Yeah, I will just leave it at this. This is the same organization, the NCAA. They made something to prohibit this. Title IX was built essentially to give women's sports the same equality, the same accommodations, everything to share equally with the men's sports. And this is the same organization that is letting their student athletes, particularly the women student athletes, those out there putting in blood, sweat, and tears. They are letting them down, and it really is a shame. But guys, I want to move to the other important sports story of the weekend, not too far away from San Antonio in the women's college basketball tournament. We can stay in state and move on over to Houston, Texas, because Deshaun Watson, these allegations are only getting worse than I think all of us had previously or initially anticipated. Houston lawyer Tony Busby said in a news conference Friday that he will be filing an additional 5 lawsuits against the Houston Texans quarterback. That brings the total cases to 12 alleging inappropriate conduct and sexual assault. Busby has also stated that he has spoken to more than 10 additional women who have come forward with reports about similar conduct from Watson. Watson's attorney, Rusty Hardin, has said that the allegations are meritless. Watson has categorically denied it. He came out before the allegations were released and said that they are false. And the NFL right now is reviewing the matter currently. Gullotta, I will go to you first. We did not know initially how bad these allegations were against Deshaun Watson, but now that we're seeing it get into the double figures with possibly 10 more women ready to come forward, Deshaun Watson, unless this is something, a smear campaign, this is something that is now irreparably probably stained his reputation no matter how it goes.
I mean, first, I hope it's not a smear campaign. Let's just
start
with that, I guess, because, I mean, that would be, I think, the worst. Because if they did that, then that's undermining everyone that actually has real allegations in, the world. And that's something that would hurt, trying to get women to speak out. And, so I hope it's not just to put down his, characteristics or whatever, his character. So I hope it's not that. And it's just too early to come up with conclusions before there's a trial and all the news comes out, all of everything comes out. I mean, look, that's a lot of lawsuits though. And like, that's something that you have to, go see, but it's just, again, it comes at a really interesting time with all the trade rumors and everything. And again, it's something that just for me, I would like to wait and see for everything to come out before we go race to conclusions about Deshaun Watson. And I'm assuming there'll be a trial and all that stuff. So right now, that's kind of where I am, just because it's so difficult to make conclusions when not all the information's out there. And it's very difficult to, kind of know who's right or who's wrong. And like right now, it's almost like a he said, she said, because you have Watson coming out against it and so it's just so difficult to really make a judgment on it.
Yeah. And I mean, 12 women, that's a lot of women. Wow. I mean, that is a lot of women. They all have a very similar story about, I think it was at a massage parlor. And so it's upsetting. It's disappointing. I mean, I think that the NFL has kind of a history sort of misconduct with women and NFL players. And so I think that, again, not surprising, but it is unfortunate that this continues to happen. And like you had said, talking about it from like a purely football perspective, in that this makes them very undesirable to trade, even if a trial goes through and they determine that it's false, this is a stain. This is a huge stain. And I think that his hopes of getting out of Texas are probably diminishing, because nobody wants to add Deshaun Watson to their organization if he is going to be followed by rumors and stories of sexual misconduct. I mean, I hope not. I guess I don't know, but I would hope that people would not want to condone and kind of continue those actions by rewarding him with bigger, more money and better teams. So it is at a bad time, I guess, for his career. But if these are true allegations, then this is terrible for what he's done to these women.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, because Deshaun Watson is crazy because he's the consummate professional. From everyone that you speak to and you hear from Dabo Sweeney to scouts, Louis Riddick, all these other guys, they talk about, the kind of man he is and being someone that you can look up to, that young kids can look at as a role model. And then for this to come out, and it's hard to, because until proven otherwise, you have to listen to these accusers and you have to let them have their day in court for a chance to prove their story correctly. So we can't dismiss them immediately. We have to wait and see what the due process is, how this works, and if it does go into criminal court. And I think for Deshaun, and Tony Busby said that inappropriate conduct from Watson, it happened as recently as this month. So when you think about that, there's a lot to unpack and unload here against Deshaun Watson. And until, they get to court and they go back and forth and we find out what it really is and what the decision is, we can't make any conclusions, of course. But I just hate that this had to come out right after, or not too long after Deshaun Watson wants out of Houston. And somebody made a point that Tony Busby, I believe he lives on the same block as the McNairs. So that's where the smear campaign, that's where that is coming from, whether Busby and McNair are somehow in cahoots. That's conspiracy theory talk, and that's for another type of show. But it really is just awful that for Deshaun, he wants to get out of Houston, play for a contender, but now this has happened. And Kayla, as you mentioned, it just seems like his reputation, whether he gets cleared or not, people are going to look at him differently now, and there's nothing he can do about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys are, completely right. And I think they will get, their day in court to obviously figure it all out. And then it's just like, it's deeper, I think, than that. As you said, it's just like that he lives right next to him. And it's just like, it's kind of weird, like in that respect. Now, who knows, maybe there's something else, but like, that's why you just have to unpack it. You kind of have to dive a little deeper into it. And I bet that, at the end of the day, the truth will come out, hopefully. And that's kind of what I think we all want here. And it's just, again, I mean, when you're looking at Deshaun Watson, he wants to get traded. I mean, I don't know what team would really want, obviously want to trade for him and that trade value. Or you really, Kayla, as you said, you want to give up like the house for someone that, has these allegations against them, because it's not like a little trade. It's the trade of your franchise, basically, and looking at it. So again, that obviously brings his trade deadline down, but then does like it come to the point, does Houston want him? And like that, would that then go into question? Would they be like, oh, we don't want this player anymore? Maybe then they want to trade. I don't know. It's just, you could look at it from so many different angles that until the truth comes out, I feel like speculating is just really, really hard. Because Andrew, as you said, it's such a slippery slope.
Yeah. And I would just say this. Sorry, Kayla. I would just say this. We don't even know if this proves correct, Kayla. Deshaun Watson could be suspended. He might not even see a snap this upcoming year. So I think until we find out, I mean, teams aren't going to call Houston at all. And I think Caserio and the Texans, this is not a situation they're happy about, but at least they can kind of, breathe a sigh of relief that they no longer have to worry about the trade stuff. But this is much more important than whether or not you want to decide to trade your star quarterback.
Yeah, and I kind of want to circle back to Posadas. You had said that like everyone talks about his professionalism, but how many women reporters, I guess, have also said that? Like, I don't know that number at all, actually, but all these men may say, oh, he was such a great guy, but we've heard that a lot where, like in the Mets case, I think with Jared Porter, they never talked to any women reporters about how they felt about him. And so I think that it's hard for me to say that he is such a professional guy. And I've been covering Deshaun Watson since his beginning of his trade rumors. And so I personally have soured on him just because I'm tired of his saga. And so I don't know that that's enough reason, but I think that the fact that all of these men and Watson and his coaches, and they're like, oh, but he is a really good guy. But that's the point, right? Is that men always are going to kind of side with them and say, oh no, my God, my friend would never do something like that. My friend would never be a sexual offender. And that's the whole movement, right? Not all men, right? But the point is that they don't know that because he would never behave that way to them. And so I think that like, it's hard to say that he is or has always been a professional because they don't know what he's like when he's getting a massage from a female, from a woman, I mean, they've never seen him in that situation. And so as the numbers rise, I tend to give more credence, especially to the women coming forward. It is not easy to come forward as a sexual assault victim. And so that's obvious. And nobody wants that spotlight on them. So it's hard for me to be like, it could be a smear campaign, and it could. I'm not saying that it isn't. But I tend to kind of give more credence to the women saying things about him because these teammates, these men, these coaches, they don't know how he talks to women. They don't know how he reacts to them in private.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great point because it's not like he's going to act like that around, Louis Riddick or whatever it ends up being. So it's definitely going to be interesting. And as you said, I mean, as the numbers rise, I think that this story is going to get larger and larger and larger. And, if you get, I mean, I think he said, the lawyer said he's going to get another 10, like that's like then, I mean, 20, and it was happening like a month. He said like within the month. I mean, it's definitely something that you're like, this could be something that's definitely for real as the numbers start rising. Cause like, one person's different than 12, different than 22 for sure. And that's something that, again, I feel like time will tell. I think that's the biggest thing. And if it ends up being true, I mean, let's hope the NFL does, end up acting on it, because in the past they've been, very like 2-game suspensions. I know the whole Ray Rice thing, and, there have been a few other instances. So hopefully that, if it ends up being true, the NFL does act on it. So it'll be very interesting to see how all of that works out. And really it is just time will tell here, but we are past midnight, and I think that's a perfect time to wrap up our first headline segment. And thank you, Andrew. We'll be back with you, for the second headline, talking NBA and all that stuff. And then after the break, we are going to get into, me and Andrew are going to talk to WNBA star Essence Carson. And that was a really interesting interview. She had some great stuff to say. So definitely stay tuned from that. You are listening to One on One.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Welcome back into One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Andrew Posadas, and we are joined by Essence Carson. She's a WNBA champion, all-star, and former New York Liberty first-round pick. How are you doing, Essence?
I'm good. How are you guys this morning?
Doing good. Definitely doing great. And I wanted to start off with some recent news about the NCAA tournament and the disparity between the men's and women's facilities at the bubble down there in Indianapolis. As a former college athlete and kind of having that experience with sharing facilities with the men and like having that same dynamic, what were your initial thoughts on the news and just, stuff like that?
It's very disheartening, it's to see things like that happen, especially, being a collegiate athlete at one point and understanding the many hours that you put into your craft, right? There's no shortage of hours there. There's no shortage of hard work there, right? And especially in comparison to your counterparts, you both of you guys put in a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of sacrifice and dedication to the sport you love, right? And not only that, you both have to balance being student athletes, right? So if you guys are both meeting the same criteria, it only makes sense that you both are afforded the same opportunities. Especially, to say the least, especially when you have Title IX in place. That's exactly why it was put in place. So yeah, it's very disheartening.
Essence, I think about something that Emmanuel Acho said the other day when referring to women's sports. And I think he said something along the lines of, you can't expect maximum results with minimal effort. And it really feels like for the women's tournament, especially, they don't get as much nationally televised games when you start with the opening rounds. I think they usually wait until the Sweet 16 to give it more of a national coverage. Do you agree with that sentiment that until women's sports gets the national spotlight it deserves, it will never truly get the maximum results that I think people are looking for?
Of course, I believe that to be true with any product that you put out there. If you don't have the support behind it, then there's no way that it's really you're gonna maximize its potential, right? Not saying that it won't work, it's just that you won't maximize the potential of that product. And then that works the same with basketball. That's something that we've been fighting for, and something that we as professional women have been championing for a long time now. And it seems that, okay, now people were able to step up to the plate and see the results, with increased viewership. And now you see a lot more women with endorsement deals. I think it's deservingly so. Yeah, when you put minimal effort behind something, you can't expect maximum results. That equation just doesn't work.
Now I wanted to move over to the WNBA, and starting off with you, I know you're a free agent right now. What do you feel like your next steps are with your playing career in the league?
I'm always going to be ready. Those that do know me understand that, I work tremendously hard when the lights are on and when the lights are off, right? That's just how I was taught, how I learned the game, how I learned the game of life. It doesn't matter who's watching, you still go out there and put in work, I know it's about 10 something over there with you guys. I've been up since 6 something. As soon as this is done, I'm going to the gym, putting in some work on the weekend. The grind never stops, so I'm always be ready. So when that call comes for this year, I'll be ready. You know what I'm saying? So I'm always going to be a competitor. I'm a champion. I know how to win, and I know how to lead. As far as next steps, again, like I said, I'll be ready for this season. And then at the same time, I do have other things going on as well. That's the beauty of today's athlete. We're not just confined to being someone that participates in our sport. A lot of us have many other businesses that we're part of, whether it's our own businesses or whether we've gone ahead and stepped into other arenas in different industries. So, with me being, into music and in the music industry, that's not going to stop. I'm going to continue to grind there as well. And like I said, I'm always going to be ready. I'm a hard worker, and I'm a competitor.
Essence, I love that you bring that up, because I remember watching an interview with you and Tina Charles, and Tina calling you a Renaissance woman. And I think now in today's sports, we're seeing athletes, we're seeing that mantra more than an athlete. I think off the top of my head, Maya Moore taking years off of her career to fight and help those who are incarcerated. I think about Renee Montgomery now, being one of the owners of the Atlanta Dream, and yourself, your endeavors in the music industry. How proud are you of just the progression that athletes have had in today's world, where they're just no longer, as you said, they're no longer confounded to their respective sport? There's so much out there for you guys to do with your platform. How proud are you when you see your other contemporaries and what they've been able to do off the court?
I'm extremely proud. When I was coming up, it wasn't necessarily the most popular thing to do. I always had, someone in my ear, that was a naysayer. But then I also had an amazing supporting staff, a supporting group, right? Supporting circle, that encouraged me to continue to explore my different passions and different loves and things like that. So it's great to see people break out of that box, You know, a lot of times they try to have athletes or just people in general, you know, reside and live in these boxes that are very, very tight, very, very small, very, very limiting. And now you get to see that life is so much greater than, and so much greater, so much bigger than that small box that people try to get you to live in. And it's amazing to see people finally realize that and explore all the different avenues. You know, there's so many different avenues you can go down as long as you're committed and dedicated to putting in work and to learning. And you're seeing that now. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that's a great sentiment. And as you were saying, like, the more than the athlete, kind of sentiment, and just kind of diving into that. I know the WNBA has really been the leaders of, fighting social justice issues. What do you think makes the WNBA athletes kind of like the pioneers to, fight social justice, maybe compared to other athletes?
One, women have always been on the front lines, throughout time. I mean, not only in sports, there's just, that I think that's just kind of in our nature. Man, so when it comes to the WNBA, I mean, when you look at it and you look around the league, we're a reflection of society, we definitely don't have much to lose, but we have everything to stand for. Because we see a bright future ahead of us as long as we continue to fight and blaze those trails. So if we were to sit down and be quiet, there would be no way we would even get to the point where we are now. We wouldn't have lasted this long, right? So then if we're going to sit there and fight for ourselves, what sense does it make to be quiet about fighting for someone else? Especially when we come from these communities, the people that make up these communities are people that look exactly like us. And so we know what it feels like to be marginalized, right? We know what it feels like to be looked over, to feel that you don't have a platform as big as your counterparts, right? So we make the most of it, and we definitely dedicated last year's season to that, and even seasons prior. Whether it was, players individually, whether it was teams, last year we made it a league-wide effort, and I'm definitely happy with some of the change that we were able to be a part of, right? We didn't make it ourselves. It was you guys, it was the country that actually were able to tune in, listen, and be, I guess, inspired, or maybe just reminded,
Yeah.
We kind of became the megaphone for some of those who felt that their voices were not heard, or maybe too small. We were a reminder that you too have a voice, and don't be afraid to use it. It doesn't matter whether you're making $7 an hour, or whether you're blessed enough to pull in I don't know, a $200 million contract. At the end of the day, we're all human first.
Essence, I want to get your thoughts about the game on the court. Obviously, from when you got in to now, what are the biggest changes in the development of the women's game? What are some things that you like? And where do you think the game is heading moving forward? We're seeing so much more athleticism. We're seeing more young women out there dunking. Where do you see the game moving in the future?
I mean, you can definitely see where it's moving already. Much higher scoring games. You kind of liken it to the men's side, where now you're seeing, you have 5 people on the floor that can be effective offensively. It used to be, you maybe had 2 people that were able to actually score at a high clip, and then it became the 3 with the big 3. And then now, you have these stretch 4s and even stretch 5s that can, get out there and play behind the arc, and they're not afraid to let that thing fly. So, I mean, the game is definitely spreading wide open, which is definitely creating more lanes for you to see, people driving to the lane, getting to the cup. And being able to showcase their athleticism, the game is definitely speeding up. You're going to see much more higher scoring games. Again, it's good. I mean, the players are getting better and better each year. Like you said, more athletic. And you can attribute that to players starting much younger. and they're developing their skill set at a much younger age, and even just understanding what it looks like to put in the work. What does that look like? I know people before when the WNBA first came around, you didn't really know what you had to do in order to become a professional athlete. You just kind of just play ball. So now, the people, this generation that's coming up now, they've been able to watch the WNBA throughout their entire lifetime, right? And be inspired, and not only that, set the bar for themselves. And they've been doing a great job, hands down. I mean, hats off. I mean, that's definitely a great job that they've been doing as athletes to push themselves, and whether it's their parents or whether it's their coaches, their trainers, they're making them hard nosed and making them tough.
And I think a lot of people saw that, progression in the game in the bubble. I think more eyes were on, the WNBA. I mean, I just wanted to ask, what was it like playing like in a bubble, and like how different is that, playing than normal times?
For me, it was cool. I'm okay with just being stationary, but I know it's tough for a lot of people, not being able to move around freely, and enjoy the many things that they do like to do. So, so they're, we don't just only play basketball. I love, that's not, that is our profession. I mean, for lack of better words, it is our job, but there's so many other things that people like to do. And when you take those things away from them, sometimes it weighs on them a lot mentally. So seeing a lot of people struggle with playing inside of a bubble mentally, that was like the biggest part of it. And today's life is just different. Living life through a pandemic is just different all around. Even if you were at home, self-quarantining at home, safe at home orders and stuff like that. So that in itself was just a different world. And you add the element of basketball, playing without fans, you had to adjust to that. Playing in front of fans for so long, feeding off the crowd. Oftentimes we say the crowd is either your sixth man or you're the X factor, and they can kind of get behind you and kind of get you over those humps in the game, right? When you take that element away, it's like it's purely, just you and your teammates out there just trying to pump each other up. And, you can't deny the fact that the crowd definitely adds an element to the game. But what you were able to see was that a lot of athletes just key in, band together, and just continue to motivate themselves and bring it back to the fundamental element of the game, which is just being a competitor and just playing your ass off.
And Essence, before we get you out of here, I mentioned the interview that you had with Tina. At the beginning of that video, though, there was a song you were bumping. I believe it's called Floss, and that instrumental had my head bumping. So Essence, I think the most important question is, off the court, are we getting any new music? What are the plans for the music in the future for you? Because that song in the beginning, let me tell you something, I was bumping to that. So I need to know what's up with the music.
Man, there's a lot that's going on with the music, on my side personally, definitely crafting up a lot of things on my side to give to you guys, just been taking in all the different experiences throughout this past year. A lot of things could, some might take as being heavy. But at the same time, there are things that we need to talk about, we need to hear. So I've just been putting something together that kind of like surrounds, that viewpoint, because I think it's a very important time. And, at this time, I think some people need a little guiding light. So
Great. A WNBA champion, all-star, and musician as well, Essence Carson. Thank you for joining us, Essence.
Thank you, Essence.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We'll be right back on One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Longest running sports call-in show, 90.7 FM we're on right now, and I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Kayla Wentzel, and we're going to get into some Mets news here, as we'll start off with, this team with the injuries, I feel like even in the Steve Cohen era, they still can't catch a break with Carlos Carrasco. It seems like he's going to be out 6 to 8 weeks, and I think it's a hamstring tear for him. The Mets got him in the Francisco Lindor trade. It felt like he was almost an add-on, which was so great. Like the Mets were getting a really good pitcher along with one of the best players in baseball in Lindor. And he had a great year in 2020, 2.91 ERA. And then 2019, his season was, it was cut short, but, he was diagnosed with cancer and I know he had a high ERA, but he had a lot going on, I think so. And then you go back to 2018 and he was just lights out again, over 200 Ks, 17 wins, 3.33 ERA. And, you just see that he would have been such a nice piece in that Mets rotation. And he will be once he comes back. And, it seems like they'll get back to him around Memorial Day, which will be interesting. SMY's Andy Martino reported that. And for me, it stinks that Carrasco gets hurt because everyone was talking about him because he really lengthed out this Mets rotation, especially when you already have Noah Syndergaard, who's going to start the year on the injury list. So, again, it's just that Mets depth. I think they have more depth this year, but the injuries right now, if they have a few more, they'd really start piling up.
Yeah, I think that Carrasco is interesting too. He, in spring training, he's kind of struggled with health even before this hamstring. He started late because he got the COVID vaccine, and then they said that he was sitting out with some elbow soreness for a little bit in the middle of there, and now he's out again for 6 to 8 weeks. So I guess with him, it really will be. The key for him will really be keeping him healthy. And then he is a great added bonus onto this team, someone that people weren't really expecting for the Mets to get. And he would just be a fun extra depth for them, but it will be the key of keeping him healthy. He's obviously had he had leukemia in the past. So I think he is a really strong added piece as long as he's there. And so we'll have to see how the 6 to 8 weeks goes. All of that could be extended if his injury doesn't do as well. But luckily for the Mets, they have done such a good job in the offseason that they have depth to cover him right now. So they are still okay, even though he's injured.
Yeah, you talk about if his timeline gets extended, the Mets know too much about that. I remember Jed Lowry had 7 at-bats for the Mets. He was their big free agent signing a few years ago, and it was first 2 weeks, then it was 2 months, and then it ended up being 2 years, the way it was all said and done with him. But so let's hope it doesn't get to that point. But with this Mets staff, I think the difference between this year and last year, where they also had a lot of injuries too, they have the depth this year, which I think is the biggest thing. And obviously DeGrom, everyone's going to talk about him. He's just looked amazing this spring, and it's so nice to just see him pitch. And just that's when as a Mets fan, it's springtime, when Jacob DeGrom is just dealing on the mound, and Marcus Stroman looks good. He has a new pitch. Taijuan Walker threw 5 innings scoreless in the spring. So those guys are coming along. You have David Peterson, who had a nice rookie season last year. And then, you also have Joey Lucchesi. I think Joey Fuego is his nickname. And he's a guy that's going to jump into this 5 spot, it seems. And last year, or over the last few years, he's been like a 4 ERA guy. And then you have Jordan Yamamoto behind him, kind of like a 4 ERA guy. They got him from the Marlins, Lucchesi from the Padres. And to me, those 2 guys are just going to be so big with depth, because last year you had guys, and this is no disrespect to them, like Ariel Jurado pitching, and guys with 8 ERAs, Rick Porcello having like a 6 ERA, Michael Wacha. I mean, all these guys, I mean, they're basically has-beens. At least the Mets don't have those guys coming in, and you have guys that can pitch you 5-6 innings and can get you through games. That's so important, especially now we're back to 162 games. That's, to me, the biggest thing with this Mets season. Everyone's going to talk about Lindor and those moves, but this depth is just so important. They also added Walker as well. I think those 3 guys could really be the saving grace of the rotation until Carrasco comes back, and then you have Syndergaard coming back, and you really have the big guns then coming out for the Mets.
Yeah, I think that come maybe June-ish, is that when Syndergaard's supposed to come back? Yeah, so I think that maybe come June, that you're really finally going to see the Mets that you paid for this offseason. You're finally going to see all of those pieces work together, as long as Carrasco comes back and Syndergaard comes back on time, that finally in June is where you're going to see it. But yeah, like you said, they have Jordan Yamamoto and Joey Lucchesi. So I think that they're going to be okay to cover Carrasco spots, because either of those guys, I think, could pop into that starting rotation for them and be the 5th guy. So I think that they're going to be okay, but it's not until it just sucks, because Mets fans are still waiting, they're still waiting for that big, aha reveal moment where all of their pieces that they've worked for and all this time, and now the new manager, Steve Cohen, when it's all come together, and that is still delayed even further. So I think that part of it definitely stinks as a Mets fan, but
yeah, it's a story of the life, really, I gotta say.
It's just another day in the life for you guys. I mean, it just seems like it's kind of never ending, the waiting to get good. But I do feel like that wait is coming closer. It's getting shorter, even if it's not quite yet, it's not quite today, it won't be quite on opening day. I still think that even without Carrasco and without Syndergaard, you still have a really solid and a really great depth in your team.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part when you're looking at, they have now 5 guys that can give you the innings. I mean, they couldn't before. I mean, that's just what it was last year. And you had the hitting, which was playing. I mean, they were like the best batting average in baseball, but you had no one who can pitch. And then the bullpen would get wore out, because if you're only going 2 innings, it's too much. It's everything tumbles on itself. And then, you get a really bad team. But that's just, this Mets rotation, I'm very happy that they picked up some guys, because every team has injuries. And I think that was the one thing that Brodie Van Wagenen and that kind of regime didn't understand, because they said, he would go out and say the Mets have the best rotation in baseball, and then have the highest ERA. And that was just, because they had 5 guys, and after that it was AA guys, and that's what they were putting out. And now at least you have guys that can come up in here. Yeah, they're not big names, they're not your big name 5 starters, but they can get you innings, and that's so important early. And then it may be an omen having Syndergaard and Carrasco with a well-rested up, when everyone's obviously going through the, that tough major league season where, once you hit July, June, you're like, it's grueling. And now you have 2 fresh guys that can just be so big. So hopefully, as you said, they come back and we don't see any, setbacks. But again, that's going to be really interesting. Also with the Mets bullpen as well. Another place where you have some injuries too, and they're going to need some players to step up, like Edwin Diaz, who's faltered in the past. So the pitching depth is going to be something that, as a Mets fan, I'm going to be really, interested to see, hopefully excited, the new depth, but that's kind of where I'm looking at kind of the biggest point of this team, especially on the pitching side of the ball. But now going to the other side with the bat here for the Mets. And I think the big thing when you look at this lineup and their starters in the field, it's extensions. How can they extend these guys? How can they build that long-term success? And that starts off with the guy that they traded for over the winter, and that's Francisco Lindor, as contract extension talks have started. And it seems like the Mets are going to be almost certainly willing to go over the $300 million mark to lock up Lindor, which, as a Mets fan, that's just music to my ears to lock this guy up. You just see him in spring training. I know spring training means nothing, but he's already hitting grand slams. He's already hitting 300. I mean, he can play, and he's going to be hopefully for the next 10 years, he's going to be that cornerstone for the Mets that I think everyone's really been wishing for since David Wright, Jose Rea era. And that's something that I really hope that they can get that done, because he's a guy that he's going to be the guy that leads them to like this new franchise overturn. He was kind of that first move, and now it's time to lock him up.
No, I agree. I think that it is of the utmost importance to make sure that Francisco Lindor is staying for a very long time in New York. Like, otherwise it would all be for naught, kind of like to have the 1 year, like, but you don't get anything else out of it, then what's the point of that? So I definitely think that they are going for something really long term. And if like there's any indication, they could go 14 years, 13 years, for like $330 million, depending on how much they're really willing to spend. And I mean, I think that they have to hit over the $300 million mark, because I mean, look at the precedent, like Manny Machado, Bryce Harper, Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, like they all have like 12-year contracts for over $300 million. So Francisco Lindor is going to be looking for something the same. And I think that the Mets would be crazy to not give that to him. Like, give it to him, give it what he wants, make him stay for 12 years so that you can build an entire Mets franchise around him. And he can be the centerpiece of the Steve Cohen era. He can be like the figurehead of the Mets, So I think it would be so crazy, so dumb if they let him pass for this 1 year, which I know that they won't do.
Yeah, Steve Cohen's not letting that happen. I just know it. Uncle Stevie, he listens to the fans. He's not letting this one go. He knows. And, as you said, the 300 million mark, I mean, for him, he's worth over like 14 billion. This is like almost a drop in the bucket for him. He's going to get this done. I really hope so. And I'm not worried about it. This may be the first time, as a Mets fan, where I'm not worried about them giving the big money. I think I was when they signed Yoenis Cespedes, and, when he made that insane run. Jacob deGrom had even got a little shaky, and he's like the consummate team leader that you need. And he was even getting a little shaky with him, and they got him on a great contract. But even that, like, this is the first time where, like, I feel like it's okay. And, you talk about the 13 years, and maybe at the back end of that contract, it's not the best, but I mean, that's an area with, Lindor. If you can get 6-7 good years out of him, I mean, that would just be amazing. The cornerstone, hitting number 3 in your lineup, playing shortstop. I mean, he's really that guy that could be the face of this franchise. And I'm just so excited to see him, play in Citi Field with the orange and blue. That's the one thing this spring I'll be just so happy about.
Yeah, I mean, he is only 27. So if they, I mean, so 13 would be a long time, but, he still has a lot left in him. He still has probably a good 10 years. Like, you can definitely probably milk a good 10 years, I kind of want to say. And then maybe around the 37-year mark, it'll maybe start to falter a little bit. But so I think that he should be looking at maybe like a 11-year contract with the Mets. So that is my preliminary opinion as not his agent, but
they'll give it to him, I think. And that's something, like, especially with the DH coming to the National League, I mean, it's almost certainly going to happen. Then maybe once he hits 35, 36, you could kind of move him into that DH role. Because, I mean, he's the guy that just seems like it's not like he's a power hitter or like a big speed guy. He's a big contact hitter. I mean, yes, he has a speed, great defender, but you just see like his hitting, I think later in his career will age well. And, that's something with Lindor I'm just so excited about. And then another player, not a new player, homegrown player for the Mets, that's Michael Conforto, who's a big team leader on this team, looking for an extension now. And according to New York Post Mike Puma, he said there's not a lot of movement so far, but they have started contract talks. Both Lindor and Conforto said they wouldn't negotiate during the season. So that's something that you would like to get these two guys locked up. But it's now, it's the 20th now that the show's on, and we're getting close to that opening day. So it's definitely going to be a tight squeeze. But Conforto is a guy you would love to lock up just because he is that homegrown player drafted by the Mets. I mean, came up 2015, jumped onto the scene, helped them make a World Series. I mean, he had 322 last year, 30 home runs in 2019, over 30 home runs, I should say. Good outfielder, corner outfielder that, was a good piece. I mean, if I'm the Mets, it's another step. Give him the money. He deserves it. And I would love to see him stay in the orange and blue for a long time.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, I think that both of them had said that they will not talk during the season. So if they want to get this, they got to get it really quick. They got to get it pretty soon. But I also had read that they were nowhere near close. So I don't know. It definitely is a little concerning because like you said, time is running out. If they don't want to talk when season's happening, then you have got to get this done, and you have to get it done soon.
Yeah.
And like you said, Conforto is he's just such a team piece, you know, he's a staple. He's essential to the Mets. I feel like he's part of their image as well. And so definitely would be great to have both of those guys out here in the long term. And I mean, for you to actually see them, you can actually see them this summer, Andrew, like that's very exciting.
I mean, Michael Conforto, he's a guy that I think he's a fan favorite too. And just being homegrown and like that whole core, and they're going to want to lock up that whole core, because I know that over the last few years, it's been bumpy, but you see the potential of guys like Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil. I mean, now the pitching is obviously outstanding with DeGrom, and they're probably going to have to give him a new contract. But I mean, it just seems like, you know, right now with the Mets, that core, they're going to get paid. But just one quick thing before we wrap up. As you said, fans will be back in the stands for the MLB, which I'm really excited about. 20% for the New York teams at Yankee Stadium and Citi Field. And I'm just so happy about this. To me, it's great progress. To me, they're also doing it in a safe way. It's not like they're like Texas going doing 100%. Like that would be crazy. They're not doing that. So, I mean, I'm happy. I got my tickets, in April, late April. I can't wait to see this new team. And again, I feel like nearing that sense of normalcy as, you know, the vaccine rollout and all that stuff. And again, especially for baseball, it's such a thing like that. There's a ballpark experience to be had. And it's just so fun, you know, for me to be back at Citi Field will just be amazing.
No, I agree. And I think it's funny. I think every team is allowing a certain number of fans this year. I think maybe except for Toronto, but I think on the whole, all of the teams are allowing them at like a certain amount. But the Texas Rangers are like 100% opening day, everybody come. So I think that is definitely crazy. And so I'm glad that New York is still opening their ballparks, but in a way that is not insane. We all want this to be over with. We all want it to be done, but it's not done yet, you know? So we have to kind of be patient on it, wait our turn. But like you had said earlier, like I have tickets, I think, for Citizens Bank Park when they're at 20%, and there are games when they're at 20% anyways. You know what I mean? Like that might not always make the biggest change for some of us not as great teams sometimes. And so for the Mets, I'm sure that people are really excited this year to be there, to be in the stands. Yeah. But I think that perhaps the 20% is definitely not that different than from what other teams are getting anyway. So I don't know.
You can tell that to the Marlins. I mean, I'm like going to see that, like when you see their games on TV, they're like, they have a whole, and like that stadium's built to be a baseball stadium. The whole upper deck is not filled. Like they put tarps over it because they know no one's going to show up, which I think is hilarious. But yeah, I've been at Mets games where not a lot of people, and you could definitely socially distance very nicely. As I remember going to those games where you're the only one in the section, and I bet we'll probably see more of that, but hey, I'm used to it, and I just can't wait to see my Mets, and I bet you can't wait to see the Phillies play live, and it should be a great division too. Should be a really great year, so definitely looking forward to that. So I think that will wrap up our conversation on the Mets and baseball. Next, we'll bring back Andrew Posadas for a second headline segment about the NBA. Can't wait to get into that. But first, we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to One on One.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
This is One-on-One. Andrew Posadas here, back with Andrew Gullotta and Kayla Wentzel, and it's time for another round of headlines, and we're going to keep it NBA-centric for this segment, and not this first one, not so much a headline, but more of a broad conversation that I think we should have when it comes to this year's NBA rookie draft class. If you remember, on Thursday night, Anthony Edwards, the number 1 overall pick, scored 42 against the Phoenix Suns, and at 19 years and 225 days old, becomes the 3rd youngest player in NBA history with a 40-point game. He's currently averaging 17, 4, and 3 assists this season. You look at other top rookies, LaMelo Ball, since he's entered the starting lineup through 20 games, he's averaging 20 points, shooting 47% and 43% from beyond the arc. You look at somebody like James Wiseman, averaging 12 points and 6 rebounds through 29 games, had some little bit of hampering injuries there. But more so than that, Gullotta and Kayla, there are 8 first-round picks right now averaging at least double figures. And you look at other names like Halliburton from Sacramento, Patrick Williams with the Bulls, Cole Anthony, who's on the shelf right now with the Magic, Saddiq Bey with the Pistons, and of course, Emmanuel Quickley with your New York Knicks. So, Gullotta, I'm looking at you first. When you see the production that we're getting from rookies, just how good could this rookie draft class be, considering that we thought it was really a 3-man type of draft with just Edwards, Ball, and Wiseman, but it's looking like so much more depth now?
I mean, you got to start off by giving these guys a lot of credit coming in like the COVID year and having that really short off season. And, as you said, 8 guys in double figures. And that's just in itself really impressive. And, when obviously you only have half a season to look at them, but just basing it on that, like once they get that full off season to really work on their game, it's something that you have to talk about this rookie class being special just because of that, just not having that big break. And, as you said, you're looking at up and down, you see so many great players. Obviously we've seen it more in New York with Emmanuel Quickley and just how, he's taken, the Knicks fan base by storm. Everyone wants him to start and all that stuff. And it was definitely a surprise. And just looking at it, you got to say, just with not having a lot of time to work on your game during the offseason, get acclimated with your team, and you're still like an Anthony Edwards dropping 17. LaMelo Ball has just been outstanding and really leading that Hornets team. Again, it's definitely something you have to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we all kind of underestimated this draft class a little bit. Like you said, Posadas, maybe just like we all thought it was 3 people, maybe 3 people were going to be the best, 3 people were going to be the stars, and you don't normally see, I don't know, but I feel like you don't normally see this much talent. I feel like you don't normally see rookies produce this much in their first year. Because of all of those things that Gullotta was mentioning, just like adjusting and trying to work with the team and trying to figure out where you fit. But these guys, despite the fact that COVID kind of ruined their time a little bit, they came in, they are firing on all cylinders. They are really hitting all of their marks. And Edwards with 42 points. That's incredible for a rookie. He's only 19, I couldn't do that. I'm 21, It makes me feel a little unaccomplished. And so I just think that it's so incredible what they have done so far with so little, with such a little off season.
Yeah, when you think about this 2020 draft class, and Gullotta, you mentioned the circumstances, the tournament gets canceled last March. These guys don't get a combine to kind of show scouts where they're at. They don't even get the tournament. A lot of guys use the tournament as a springboard to lift their stock up. You don't get a combine. You don't get a summer league. So you're going straight. You're waiting. You're not playing basketball. You're to yourself until you get to training camps. So I think this draft class, I think a lot of people would admit that if this draft class needed to develop a little bit slowly, considering the circumstances, that you would be more patient. But considering the fact that Edwards, LaMelo Ball, I look at Tyrese Halliburton, who the Knicks could have had. I'm sure they're happy with Obi Toppin, and I still think it'll work out. But a Halliburton, and I mentioned Saddiq Bey from Villanova, and then Emmanuel Quickley, getting him at 25. I think there was much more depth in this rookie class than I think we all thought of, considering, when you think about the heavy hitters like an Edwards, a LaMelo Ball, James Wiseman, it's easy to overlook everyone else. But when you consider what these rookies have had to go through in getting ready for the season, it's a condensed 72-game schedule. It's not the traditional type of year that an NBA player would go through. There's a lot of guys here showing that they have a ton of upside. And when you look at someone like LaMelo Ball, Charlotte's in 7th place right now in the East. So not only rookies who are giving you statistical contributions, Gullotta, but rookies who are having impacts and helping their teams stay in the playoff hunt.
Yeah, I mean, Manuel quickly is another guy. Like,
Exactly,
do you think the Knicks would be in the playoffs without him? I mean, you just kind of don't see it. And that's definitely going to be, I think, interesting down the line when you look at what the Knicks got, because they were obviously in on Halliburton, and like, who would they have rather? Because probably they wouldn't have got quickly if they got Halliburton. Maybe. I mean, we don't really know how it would have played out, but it's just it will be an interesting debate, I think, down the line to see how these guys play. And just, as you said, like, no one thought there was a lot of depth. They probably didn't know that because these guys didn't really get a chance to show themselves. I mean, besides, an NCAA season that they didn't know that was going to be it for them. Like, and obviously it's difficult for, NBA teams to know who a player is if you don't have a combine, you don't have the NCAA tournament, So I feel like that's something that probably a lot of people didn't think the depth was there because they didn't see him. And then who knows, maybe these NBA teams did, maybe they didn't, but it's definitely a surprise. And looking like a team like the Knicks, I'm really happy about it that they got Emmanuel quickly, and you get to look at like that CVS Sports draft grade. They gave him like a D, and you get to look back on it and laugh about it. But yeah, this class is definitely a special one, just considering the circumstances.
And I think what I'm most excited for about this class is just the longevity of them. I mean, they're rookies. This is their first season. And so like, what will that say about what they can do later in their careers? If they're coming out so strong right now, will this be something that we will get to see them develop so well, and we will get to know that when we talked about them in 2020, we all thought that they were an underrated draft class, and now we get to see them extend and become stars and become truly NBA legends. And so that's what I think I'm most excited about with this class, is just seeing how they progress in the future. I mean, if their first year is any indication, then these all look like they're going to have such incredible careers in the NBA.
No, that's a salient point, Kayla. I really think we could see 4 to 5 perennial all-stars there. And the Rookie of the Year award, that conversation heating up. I mean, LaMelo was far and ahead of everyone. Now Anthony Edwards coming up. That's going to be a nice race to the finish between the two of them. Guys, I want to transition over to something else because it is March 21st, which means we're 4 days away from the NBA trade deadline. Did I say tread? Oh. The NBA trade deadline, excuse me. And there are a lot of hot names on the market right now that could see movement. When you look at the likes of Andre Drummond still out there, Aaron Gordon, his name is in conversations with the New York Knicks. We talk about Kyle Lowry maybe going to Kayla's 76ers, coming back for a home reunion perhaps. You look at Hassan Whiteside, LaMarcus Aldridge. He's been sitting for a few weeks waiting for a deal. Lonzo Ball. Mark Stein has linked him with the Los Angeles Clippers. You think about Victor Oladipo as well, who may be looking to get traded as well again for the second time this season. And then maybe someone like John Collins, who's going to be a restricted free agent, get a lot of money. Maybe the Hawks don't want to pay them and they can get back something for them. Kayla, I'm looking at you. When you hear all those names, who is the most interesting name for you coming into this year's trade deadline?
I mean, come on, it has to be Kyle Lowry because he might actually come to a team that I support. And so I think that he is my top favorite, of course, but I think Lonzo Ball to the Clippers is interesting. I heard him say, didn't he say that he wanted to go to the Knicks though too, that he was interested in the Knicks?
LeVar Ball.
LeVar Ball has spoken for him, yes.
He said that he should go to the Knicks. Well, so I think that he's an interesting conversation. I mean, he would clearly be an upgrade to the Clippers over what they have now. But I do really like Kyle Lowry. I mean, the Raptors have said, though, that they're not going to trade him. They have stated that they are not trading. But because Philadelphia is his home city, playoff contention, I think that there's a big pull right now, a big draw to Philadelphia. So I don't know that it'll actually end up happening. And I mean, we only have 4 days, so we're really cutting it close. But I do hope that it happens.
Yeah, I mean, that LeVar Ball story, they said he can't stay in New Orleans. I mean, it's like you're not surprised by it just knowing how LeVar acts, but it's just, I mean, you almost chuckle. And like, I mean, for me, I as a Knicks fan, I think that, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what they would give up, but I wouldn't give up anything major for anybody. I like this core, and I feel like free agency is where the Knicks should build their team. But again, it's definitely something that would be interesting add for them. But to me, my biggest one is Andre Drummond. I want to see where he ends up because it seems like Lakers or Nets, and those two teams are going to be right in the thick of it for the NBA Finals, NBA Championship. and he's probably going to make a difference if he would get traded or released. He's going to be a big difference because it seems like he'd go to one of those two teams. And, when those two teams are really finals favorites, Drummond could really push either team over the edge.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to say Aaron Gordon, only because I wasn't expecting him to be on the trade block leading into this. But now I feel like he is a kind of guy. He's a starter in this league, someone who can stretch the floor, kind of a combo 3-4. And I don't think he's going to cost you that much. Look at what, and I harp back to what the Bucks had to give up to get Drew Holiday and giving up multiple first-round picks. And that's Drew Holiday. So that's already setting the precedent. Aaron Gordon is not that. He's a tier below a guy who is a fringe all-star if he's in the right position. So I think maybe, is it the New York Knicks? He's been linked there. I think teams, they're going to make calls. And if they can swing a good deal where they don't have to mortgage a chunk of their future for Aaron Gordon, I think he would be a great pickup and a great addition. But I would say this, and this is what I think. Why do I feel in the back of my head, right here in my noggin, that the Brooklyn Nets are going to end up with one of these guys that I mentioned, Andre Drummond, LaMarcus Aldridge, one of those guys, Hassan Whiteside, somebody's going to end up with the Brooklyn Nets. Kayla, I don't get it, but the Brooklyn Nets are getting everybody. And I have to think before the deadline's over or even afterwards in the buyout market, the Nets are going to continue adding and the rich are going to get richer.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I was not thinking of the Nets in the back of my head because they have been kind of very quiet right now. I feel like they have not really been linked to that many players. And so I think that they're they would be, I don't know, it would be surprising to me, I feel like, just because I haven't heard them so outrageously going after these players, but I wouldn't put it past them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about when you look at these two teams, I think they're the two favorites right now, but there are a lot of teams. And it's like my opinion is, if you think let's put the Nets scenario, let's say they have 2 to 3 years to win this thing. I mean, you kind of put all your eggs in one basket. You probably keep doing that. I mean, I would, because this could be a shot that you have. You look at the Eastern Conference, look at the Nets. It's very, very thin. And I think the Nets, if they headed Drummond or someone like that, another big man, LaMarcus Aldridge, as you said, it puts them head and shoulders above everyone else. And that's something when you feel like you pinpoint that your team could win a championship, and a team like the Nets that haven't won one, you're like, this is it. We can do it right now. And adding a guy like Drummond, you may be willing to stretch a little more in a trade or a buyout if you can sell that to a player. I think that really is paramount.
Yeah, and I would say this with some teams. I think specific teams are kind of limited in what they think they're going to receive. Like, think about the Cavaliers. What are you honestly going to get for Andre Drummond? He's going to be a free agent. Which team is going to have to take that money and then give back that money in return? It doesn't feel like a fit. And then LaMarcus Aldridge with the Spurs. I mean, he's on the back nine of his career. Who is really going to give up anything substantial for LMA? I don't see it. So I think for teams like the Cavs and the Spurs, they're not going to get any trade offers. And guys like Drummond and LaMarcus Aldridge, I think it's already set in stone that if they're not traded, they're going to get bought out. So I think teams out there, contenders especially, they're looking at it. And if they need a big, they're just going to wait it out. They're not going to offer those teams anything, because I think there's already this kind of silent agreement that certain players, if they don't get traded by March 25th, they will be bought out. And then from there, teams can just vie for their services, after March 25th and see if they can make an addition before the month of April.
Yeah, like you're saying for Andre Drummond, I mean, he's got a really big salary, $28.7 million. I mean, so I think that if anybody offered anything to the Cavs, that would be a win to them, really, if they could get anything in exchange. So he, like you said, I think that if nobody is going to take that on, they'll just buy him out and stop paying that salary. Because I think that Andre Drummond is not carrying that much trade value. Like, I don't think the Cavs are really expecting all that much in return for him.
Yeah, it's something that just I feel like, as you said, that unspoken agreement, players going to sign. And that's something if I was the Nets, you could probably wait it out. And there's no motivation to get the trade done. And that's usually how I think trades at this time get done. There has to be a lot of motivation. And maybe the Nets, they feel like, oh, we give up maybe a little something extra and pay this guy and stuff like that to, win a championship. Maybe the motivation's there, but if you have two other guys getting bought out, you probably don't have to trade for, a guy. So again, that's just kind of when you look at all these trades, and unless maybe a team feels like they're upgrading from, maybe, a little of a contender to a real contender, maybe they want to get the trade done. But besides that, I feel like a lot of buyouts are going to happen. And then, Andrew, as you said, rich get richer. And that's just kind of, I feel like how we're kind of as we go down the stretch. I think that's kind of how this NBA season's shaping up.
Yeah, it seems like we might be a little bit let down by this year's trade deadline. I think teams understand that certain players are still going to be available in the buyout market. It's cheaper. You don't have to give anything up. And for the teams that have these trade chips, I mean, you just can't keep them past this season. Guys have been sitting, like Andre Drummond's been sitting for over a month, 2 months. And even if you can't trade him, you got to let him go and see if he can play. Just can't hold these guys hostage until the offseason. We'll see what happens 4 days away from the March 25th NBA trade deadline. My final headline for this segment, guys, it's an interesting one because after the Lakers Thursday night win over the Hornets, Kyle Kuzma had some interesting words when talking about LeBron James. He said, quote, Bron should have been the MVP at least 8, 9, 10 times. Everybody knows that, end quote. Now, LeBron, when he was asked about it in his Zoom conference, he said, quote, I should have more than 4, I believe, but I don't sit around thinking about it or crying about it or whatever the case may be, end quote. Gullotta, does LeBron and Kyle Kuzma, does Kyle Kuzma have a point about LeBron James needing or maybe warranting more than 4 MVPs and getting maybe up to 10 MVPs at this point?
I think Kyle Kuzma may be a little too much, but I think LeBron's actually right. He's like, I probably should have won more than 4, but I don't know about 10. Like, I think that was kind of like a perfect summation of what, he thinks, because I mean, I think sometimes like other guys definitely deserve it. And like, even though LeBron's putting up an amazing season, other guys deserve it and they should, get it. You think about the triple-double seasons or like James Harden, what he was doing, Kevin Durant, like back in the day. But I mean, there are some times where I feel like the media, just because they know LeBron's over there, he gets underestimated. And that's why he probably should have more than 4. But I don't know how much, extra, like 10's a little, I think a little much. But I mean, he's such a great player for so long. And I do think that the NBA, they like to share the wealth a little bit because like LeBron, it's always the same storyline. So when you have a new player, you have different storylines, and that's more intriguing, which is probably why, you always see the MVP going into new hands.
Yeah, I think that it really like draws into the broader discussion of what does MVP mean, who deserves an MVP. And our producer Alex Walls always has something interesting about this, and he's always saying that it isn't necessarily. It's not like LeBron is consistently one of the best players, but does that mean that he's consistently the MVP, the most valuable player? Like, I'm not sure that necessarily means the exact same thing. So just because LeBron is an all-star and he's a legend, and yeah, maybe he deserves more than 4, I'm not sure that it means that he deserves 8. He doesn't deserve it every season just because he plays and he plays well. There are other players who play every season and who have star seasons, who are most valuable to their team in that year. And so I think that LeBron is valuable to his team every year. And so it just depends on like what player is most valuable to their individual team. So I think that LeBron is consistent and he's always someone that you can look to as an all-star and as a legend, but that he perhaps is not like the centerpiece of everything in the moments. Like, I'm not sure that I want to give him 10.
Yeah, I think Rachel Nichols says this best about the MVP award. There should be 2 awards, the most valuable player and the best player in the league, because I just think it's so subjective. Yeah, it's subjective, and it's politics at the end of the day. And I think that's something that's worked against LeBron. LeBron has always kind of been dismissive of the MVP. Like, if I don't win it, and this was before, now he's kind of changed his tune, but before, after he went in that stretch where he won, I believe 4 and 5 years, and I think Derrick Rose had won that one in between. After that, LeBron was never, he never came out and said, I should be the MVP. He always dismissed it and said, you know what, I'm here to win championships, to chase that ghost in Chicago. And I think media members have listened to LeBron and said, all right, we're going to look at other storylines of Derrick Rose, Steph Curry winning back-to-back MVPs and really taking the league by storm. Giannis, going out and doing that. James Harden that one year going over 30 and his efficiency numbers, going off the charts. So I think now LeBron's kind of looking back and saying, if I was a bit more vocal and I was trying to put it out there like, hey, look at me, maybe I'd have a 5th. Maybe I'd be tied with MJ and Bill Russell with 5, or maybe I'd even be tied with Kareem with 6. So I think that's kind of worked against LeBron, but there's no doubt about it. At 36 years of age, the Lakers are 4-0 after the All-Star break. He's doing it without Anthony Davis. I think if they can secure a top 2 seed, even a top 3 seed, and with AD not coming back just yet and LeBron having to work without him for maybe a majority of this season, I think this is probably LeBron's best case for MVP. And I think he understands, Gullotta, that at this point, if he wants to win the MVP, he's going to have to say it with his chest, or else the media members are going to look elsewhere to find another great story in the NBA.
Yeah, and just like I don't see LeBron doing that. Like, it's just like, it's at a certain point, like maybe he will. And I feel like at this point, I think before, like, especially in his Miami days, he cared a lot more about his legacy. I think that was still in his mind. To me, I don't think it really is anymore. I think he talks about those years in Miami as like his college years almost. And I think that, there was a change. Like, maybe he still cares, but at the end of the day, you're going to look at him being an all-time great. And, you look at other sports too, as you said, like the best player doesn't always win most valuable player. Like Tom Brady doesn't have 12 MVPs, or, go to baseball. Not like Mike Trout wins it every year, but again, it's definitely a very interesting discussion. It always is when it comes around, to these MVP conversations. But I think with all that said, it is time to wrap up our final headlines segment. Thank you, Andrew, as always. I know you'll talk with us a little later, getting into all of the free agency news, and there's definitely a lot. So that will definitely be really fun. Kayla and I will come back to talk to PT Isles podcast host and WFUV alum Joe Buono when we get back from this break. You are listening to One on One.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Welcome into another edition of Off the Air, the legacy of WFUV Sports. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Kayla Wentzel, and we're joined today by Joe Buono. He's currently the host of PT Isles for SB Nation's Lighthouse Hockey and runs the nyislesblog.com and at Islesblog on Twitter. Also, he's an SVP in IT risk and control at HSBC, kind of, the other side. And then you said like the fun stuff. I love how you said that. And then also Fordham class of 2004 and was a sports manager in 2004 as well. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing well. Thank you guys so much for thinking of me. I've been watching from afar and very happy that you got so far down the list. I was able to join you.
That's great. We're very happy to have you. And I kind of want to go back all the way to the beginning. And I wanted to ask you, when was the first time you knew you wanted to work in the sports media industry or at FUV and stuff like that?
So massive sports fan growing up in Brooklyn, and like a lot of WFUV broadcasters probably had muted the TV in your childhood bedroom and done play-by-play. I think growing up in New York, you had Marv Albert, you had Bob Murphy, obviously Gary Cohen. So you had some, legendary sports broadcasters. If you weren't playing basketball in your backyard when I was growing up and, yes, and it counts, and do that on your own, you weren't really a fan. I knew I wanted to kind of work in communications and journalism, but I actually started off going to Lincoln Center and commuted my freshman year at Fordham, and I wrote for the Observer. So that's kind of where I felt like I was gonna go. And I didn't know a ton about FUV. I know right now people may come to Fordham for the purpose of working at WFUV. I didn't really know the legacy and the history behind it. And my sophomore year, I started thinking about maybe wanting to go on campus and live away from my parents and move from Brooklyn to the Bronx, as long as I could come home on weekends to get my laundry done and get a meal. And Frank Mentasana, who also was a big part of WFUV, he was a year younger than me, and he went to the same high school as me. So he told me, as I'm a sophomore and he's a freshman, I'm like, hey, can I come up and kind of experience campus life? I'm thinking about maybe transferring up to Rose Hill. He goes, yeah, you can come up, but I just have this workshop thing that I'm doing, this radio thing I'm checking out. It's the first time this guy Dave Sims or someone is going to be doing a workshop. I was like, I know who Dave Sims is. He's like, yeah, so why don't you come? And I'm sure you could come along. I'm sure it's not a big deal. And I got completely hooked. I went to that first workshop and Dave Sims was there. Met Bob Aarons for the first time at that class. And, they talked about all the things you guys have heard, the art of play-by-play, painting the word picture. I think Bob said, can anyone describe the room? I raised my hand and I said, it's a square rectangle room with 12 desks and, square lights above us. And Bob will be like, what kind of lights? Fluorescent lights, LED lights. And met Bob afterwards and away I was. And that's how I got involved with FUV and started off really my sophomore year.
Well, so kind of now moving out of your time from FUV and kind of into your after college years, I see that you worked at like various different jobs, but one that particularly struck out to me was the AFL New York Dragons play-by-play announcer. And so I kind of want to know a little bit more about that experience. How did that come about? And did you like it? No one really talks about the AFL that often. So
it's kind of, been defunct and kind of came back a few different times. And this kind of goes back to relationships. So Peter Schwartz, who's still a sports anchor on the New York scene, great guy, right? And he was one of those guys that was in the press box when I would cover Met games, Yankee games, Jets and Giants, etc. And we built a relationship. And he was the play-by-play announcer for the New York Dragons. And they ended up striking a deal with MSG to broadcast a certain amount of those games on TV. And Peter, being the great guy that he was, recommended me to the vice president of communications for the Islanders and Dragons, Christopher Botter, as someone that can fill those shoes. So I went to the Coliseum. I did a demo by myself and ended up doing 3 games for the Dragons during that season. One at the Coliseum on Long Island, and then I got to travel twice, once to Columbus, Ohio, once to Austin, Texas. And the games were on Radio Disney. Bob, of course, listened, called me right after the game was over. And, I can say that I did play-by-play for a professional sports team. I got to be on the plane wasn't a chartered plane, but I got to be on the plane with the professional team. I got the stipend from the team on how much money I could spend over the course of the weekend. So that was a great experience. I had moments over the course of my post-college career that I could have pursued harder. And this is, so I did minor league baseball right after college. I had an opportunity and job offer to do AA baseball with the Connecticut Defenders. And I also had another opportunity to do women's college basketball as well. Both times I turned it down. And I remember seeing Gary Cohen, who was covering and broadcasting for Seton Hall basketball at the Big East tournament. I was there covering it for Fox. And I told him that, I had gotten this job offer from the Connecticut Defenders. They were the AA team of the San Francisco Giants. They were up by like Foxwoods Resort and Casino in Connecticut. And I told them, well, they wanted me to do three innings and no traveling on the road. And it was only going to be $700 a month and there was no board. So I didn't know how I was going to figure that out. And he said, Joe, if you turn that down, you just may not really want it as bad as you think you do. And you know what? He was right. Ultimately, the lifestyle of what it would required to do that job, the nights and the weekends, is a very different type of lifestyle. Everyone else's leisure time is when you are on and when you are working, nights, weekends, holidays, etc. And there was always something in the back of my head that wasn't sure if I wanted to go down that road. And ultimately I ended up kind of pivoting and doing something else. And that was okay. And, I have plenty of very close friends that were either at FUV with me at the time I was at the school, or I knew like Ryan Rucco, who just came in afterwards, that have done great, great things. And, some of you may go in a completely different path. And there's a voice inside of you who goes, what would have happened if I would have went further? But, you have to make sacrifices to kind of succeed in this business. Some people will happen very, very quickly. Other people are going to be waiting very, very long. And you have to be prepared that if it takes longer than maybe your mind wanted it to, is that the lifestyle that you want to have? If it is, great, and continue to do it. If not, there's plenty of time to find a different way.
And I'm actually in Gabelli and like trying to weigh between like the business and, sports broadcasting and that stuff. So maybe a little more personal for me with your journey. And, when you maybe made that pivot over, to the business world, like how did you do that? Like, how did that come about? Like, was there any like specific thing that like, oh, I want to do this, and that kind of thing grew into your job?
Yeah, not really. So I, again, relationships. I started working full-time in sports public relations because I still was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to do in sports radio, maybe I want to work on the sports business side of things. And we had John Cirillo and Joe Favorito and these guys that were great publicists that had Fordham pedigrees as well. I worked for John for a while. I covered a lot of boxing events, got to go to Vegas. I was in the ring, like HBO does the post-match interviews. I was in the ring getting quotes, trying to get myself on TV for like a half a second maybe before I did so. And then I worked for a company called Dan Clores Communications, and I was there for about a year, also working in sports PR. And I was not making a lot of money. And I think I was making $29,000. And I was going to get promoted that year to a junior account executive, and they were going to raise my salary to like 32. And I was like, and like, I'm an Italian kid from Brooklyn. So like, it was okay to be living at home with your parents after college, but not forever. So I started getting a little anxiety about that. And I had one of my good friends, Arthur, he was working at Morgan Stanley at the time. I was just talking about them, about how I was kind of worried about, how was I going to kind of make, better money working in this, how long it was going to take to do so. And they pretty much said, this guy's good attitude, good work ethic. On the interview, I told the person at Morgan Stanley that I had taken one business class at Fordham. It was a macroeconomics class, and I got a C- on it. I was a communications major, etc. But I told him, but I'll work really hard. I'll come in with a good attitude. And it was a contractor position, which is not a full-time position. But within 6 months, they converted me to full-time. And I was on my way. And honestly, the communication skills I learned just at Fordham and FUV helped me every single day. Like, if you want to be a leader in anything, you got to be able to bottle up a message and to talk to people. You need to be able to explain things to your team members. And then you have to be able to manage up to the most senior management within an organization to explain them clearly and concisely what it is they need, how to deliver it, etc. So, some of the things you're going to be learning at FUV, whether or not you're doing sports broadcasting or not, that's a skill set and intangibles and things that you're learning that the competition is not going to have, and that you could use to your advantage.
Yeah. So talking about your job and your kind of day job, but then your creative job on the side, how did you get started with your podcast? How was that something that you determined that you wanted to do? So
the Islanders overall, I'm not saying anything that you don't know, don't get a lot of national media attention. Sometimes they don't get a lot of local media attention, especially in, the years that they were not playing very well. I mean, that's changed in the last 2 or 3 seasons, but the Islanders were a non-playoff team or a first round and done team for many, many years. A lot of times the New York Post or Daily News would not even send a beat writer there. So there was always a craving amongst Islander fans for more content because there were so few places to get it nationally. So the Twitter account at Isles Blog belonged to someone named Connor Moore at the time, and he put out a tweet back in like 2014 that he was looking to expand his content and he was looking for podcasters. All right. I emailed him. I gave him my professional resume. I sent in, clips of me doing on-air play-by-play and on-air interviews, etc. And he called me up. He was like, I really wasn't expecting to get like anyone with professional experience, He's like, yeah, sure, you can do it. So I ended up doing that podcast for Isles Blog. Connor ultimately didn't want to keep up the account. I took over the account. in 2015. So the Twitter account now has 14,000 followers. We do the podcast every single week. I'm now part of Lighthouse Hockey and the SB Nation podcast. They actually send me a check once a month for my podcasting duties, so I can say I get paid for this stuff now. And the Islander fan base is a really tight group of fans, and Islander and hockey fans overall are pretty hardcore. If you're a hockey fan, you're a hardcore hockey fan. There aren't many fair weather ones. So the level of engagement is off the charts. And I've been able to do a lot of really cool things. Certainly we've been able to get great guests in terms of ex-players and the announcers and, guys like Jigs McDonald, who I grew up listening to, and old players like Mick Vukota and Rich Pilon and many other Islanders and other national TV and radio hockey broadcasters. And even a few years back, I was selling merchandise, Islanders merchandise, and it was the last year of the Coliseum before they came back to the Coliseum. And we came up with a great charity item called It Happened at the Coliseum shirt. And we raised over $30,000 for Make-A-Wish Foundation with the help of the Islanders getting on board with that. So that's just been kind of what I've been able to do. It's a little bit tougher now. I got a 2.5-year-old, and I got another little girl coming in June. So I don't see a lot of first periods these days. It's usually bath time. It's a little bit harder, but I've still, like last night, we just recorded one, from 10 to 11 o'clock at night. And my wife thinks I'm absolutely crazy to keep on doing this stuff, but I can't quit it. And I'm really proud of what we've been able to build. And it just, you have the ability to have a voice and find relevancy with the way social media is set up. And you don't have to, and I have not been kind of I don't say exaggerated things. I don't say terribly controversial things to get noticed. I'm very consistent with the type of content I put out there. Try to make it smart, try to make it witty, try to be able to touch on the past while talking about the present, bring on interesting guests, and you over the time, you're going to build a following, and people become loyal to that following, and you kind of become part of the fabric of what Islanders have been able to do. So hopefully I can do that for many, many more years. And if I'm not doing it myself, being on air, I want to definitely be kind of part of something that continues what I've been able to build over the last 5 or 6 years.
He is the host of the PT Isles podcast for SB Nation Lighthouse Hockey, also runs the nyislesblog.com and corresponding Twitter page at Islesblog. Thank you for coming on, Joe.
Thank you guys very much. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
90.7 one-on-one, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Gullotta alongside Kayla Wentzel and Andrew Posadas. And now let's get into some free agency talk. One of my favorite times of year when looking at the NFL offseason. It's so fun. Like, as I said earlier, just to see like every team has the optimism to go out and win a Super Bowl, and you see teams adding. And, it's really fun to see and see how all players move out, go to new homes. And, just starting off, I want to go locally here with one player who I think the Giants would love to have his new home be in New York. And that's Kenny Gullotta, the star receiver, as he visited all day with the Giants on Friday. As of Saturday, he is still in New York. He left the facility, but stayed in New York. I believe Thursday night he got there. So he's been there for over the course of like 3 days. So that is, to me, there obviously has a lot of mutual interest there. Would be a really nice get for the Giants to get that number one receiver. I mean, looking at Kenny Gullotta, he was hurt this year, but going back to 2019, he had 65 catches, over 1,100 yards, almost 1,200 yards, and 11 touchdowns. I mean, and that system with the Lions, putting up those numbers is just really, really impressive. And I mean, I heard Gullotta may want like $19 million a year, which is a lot. But I think this would be a really nice get for the Giants to really now give some weapons to Daniel Jones to throw to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little controversy with Kenny Gullotta. I don't know. He's one of the best free agents still out there, but it doesn't seem like that many people are jumping for the opportunity to get him. And I wonder if that's a little bit telling, perhaps, that maybe it really is only the Giants who are kind of going out for him wholeheartedly. But yeah, I mean, he would be a nice get for their offense. I think that he would really become like a physical presence in their passing game. And I think that he would work really well with Daniel Jones to kind of enhance the like complexities of their plays. And I think that he would just be a really good weapon for Daniel Jones to use. But I am a little just interested in it, just kind of in the fact that everyone thinks that he's the best available free agent, but yet that there's not that much going on around him.
Yeah, Kayla, I think when it comes to Kenny Gullotta, I think he is just on the wrong side of what the market is right now for wide receivers. That's the one position that is just not getting any sort of big multi-year contracts. I mean, Juju Smith-Schuster signed just a one-year deal. He declined a multi-year deal from our Philadelphia Eagles. I don't understand why you would, but I mean, that's the thing. You have to think wide receivers are not seeing that money in the multi-year deals, so they're better off kind of signing that one-year show me deal. But Pro Football Focus is predicting that Kenny Gullotta is going to get a 4-year, $85 million deal, about $38 million fully guaranteed. So I think for some teams that's just too rich for their blood. So I can't imagine teams saying, all right, we're going to spend a chunk of our cap on the wide receiver position. You can always use that money and distribute it on defense and especially on your offensive and defensive line. So Gullotta, I really have to think it's just a product of the wide receiver position, not really getting any run here in free agency. But I have to think for the Giants, if they can get Kenny Gullotta and put him out there out wide, it makes life that much easier for Daniel Jones. And I think that much easier for someone like Saquon Barkley, knowing that when he comes back fully healthy, he doesn't have to run the ball 30 plus times every game. They have a legit number one option there in Gullotta. And I think if the Giants are smart, you don't let Kenny Gullotta leave the state of New York. He can't leave. If you're the Giants, you're putting all your chips in that basket. And that's just how you want to have to go, especially if you want to take the NFC East crown with teams like Washington and Dallas getting much better and stronger heading into this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the market being not so good, and it's not, but if Gullotta is the best receiver out there, and for me, Juju, he's a guy that if you were spending like the 15 million on him, I'd be a little wary just because he hasn't really shown it as a number one. Gullotta has, and he's put it up some amazing seasons. I know the injuries last year, but I'm not really worried about that. And you look at receivers, and I know teams don't like to put a lot of money into it, but it's extremely important. I mean, look at the two teams in the Super Bowl this year. You had, Tyreek Hill, obviously tight end, but Travis Kelce, Sammy Watkins, all those weapons in Kansas City. And then you go with the Bucs, and that's stacked offense too. You have Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, Cameron Brate, and you just go down the list of all those pass catchers. And it is really important. And all those teams paid a big wide receiver. Tyreek Hill got paid. Mike Evans got paid. Chris Godwin's now franchise tag, but he'll most likely get a big time deal. And Gullotta, to me, he's that true alpha number one guy. And if you're the Giants, you really haven't had one in quite a long time. I mean, just you can go back to maybe the Plaxico Burress days when Eli Manning was throwing to him, because even Akeem Nicks, he wasn't that ultra number one guy. Golladay is, and I feel like him and you said Saquon Barkley, and I know even before his injury, he had a few bad games because they were just stacking the box. But now, if you have to, really respect Kenny Golladay, you have Sterling Shepard still, and Evan Ingram, maybe he comes into his own. We don't know, but as a really show me year for the Giants to show if they're for real here in this NFC East, and if Dave Gettleman will keep his job, if Daniel Jones will keep his job. I feel like getting him a star receiver, you're doing everything in your power to do that. Galladay's also young, so even if you end up going into a different route at quarterback, he'll still be that number one receiver for a really long time. I mean, I'm just a huge fan of Kenny Golladay, and I would love to see him play in New York.
Yeah, I don't think that his injury, it was just a hip flexor injury. So I'm not really sure, not that the hip flexor isn't important, but I'm not sure that that's really going to inhibit his performance this year. So I don't think that that should hold the Giants back. But I definitely agree. And it's interesting to me that the wide receivers right now in this market are not really getting that great of deals, and that wide receivers are not really receiving a huge payout. And that's surprising to me, because in my head, when I think about it, I think the wide receiver is one of the most important pieces in the game. And so for people to kind of be undervaluing that, and like we had talked about with Juju, and he took only a 1-year deal instead of doing multi-years. I don't know. I think that that's a very curious development, and I'm not sure entirely if it's because of, I don't know, salary cap, that people aren't maybe offering as much to wide receivers, but it's surprising to me that that is the way that this free agency is unfolding.
Yeah, and we've seen the running back position really be devalued over the last 20, 25 years. And I'm not saying that the wide receiver position is going to go through that same phase financially, but I have to think, I think for teams now, they're under the impression that if you're not transcendent, if you're not Julio Jones, if you're not DeAndre Hopkins, if you're not Michael Thomas, if you're not on that level, that caliber, you're not going to cash out at that position. I think that's the thing. That drop off is very precipitous. So if you're not that, you're not going to get paid that amount of money. And I think for Kenny Golladay, I think some teams might not be sold on him, considering he was with Matt Stafford. We all know Matthew Stafford loves to throw the ball. That's a wide receiver friendly offense. So maybe teams are a bit weary without Stafford. What can he do on another team with another quarterback who might not be as good a thrower, and as the number one option on a team that's looking to be in the playoff hunt? And unlike the Detroit Lions, who obviously have been mediocre for the better part of 40, 50 years.
It's interesting, and I really hope other teams don't think that, because Stafford, he's a great quarterback and he's throwing the ball downfield, but you watch Golladay and he's, to me, one of those guys. I really do believe that. And when free agency, I think it's a really good point, because you talk about those alpha guys, and I think when you look at free agency as a whole, the teams that have those alpha guys, they're not letting them out of their building. You talk about all those teams. I mean, maybe the Texans did with Hopkins, but they're a different issue. Let's not talk about them. But, when you talk about Julio got the long-term deal, Michael Thomas got a long-term deal. You're keeping your number ones in there. And I think number ones, they don't come that often. Golladay does leave the building just because the Lions are rebuilding and they don't really need that. They're not going to pay a big receiver right now. So you have that opportunity. And for the Giants to get that, I really would love this move. And I mean, maybe it'll be for less money just because of the wide receiver market. And it is really interesting how everyone's taking these 1-year deals. I mean, I think Josina Anderson said it, Diana Rossini said it from ESPN, of how wide receiver market especially is going to take those 1-year deals, because they would love to be back in the market in 2021 when your salary cap is way higher. As we said before, the TV deals are just going to be like these huge deals, like tens of billions of dollars, which is going to up that salary cap. But it's definitely interesting, when looking at this receiver position. And I do want to move over to Juju, and we talked about him a little earlier, him signing that 1-year, $8 million deal. The other team in New York, the Jets, were interested. The Eagles were interested. And I just think it's interesting, because I do think that Juju probably could have got that double-digit $1 million deal. I think he stood in with the Steelers because I think he thinks he should get paid as a number one. And his best option to do that would have been stay for a year with the Steelers, already know their system. Big Ben's coming back. You already have that, chemistry with him. And if he has a big year, then next year salary cap goes up and he gets paid. And if he doesn't have that good of a year, kind of the same as this year, you're kind of in the same situation you were. So it's not that bad for him. So Juju's an interesting guy, but just for me, I don't think he's number one. And I think his market kind of dictated that. So for him, he goes back to the Steelers, and now is another chance to prove himself.
Yeah, I mean, it was disappointing as an Eagles fan. Of course, I would have liked to see him move over and then wearing the green uniform. But for him, he could not lose by staying in Pittsburgh, to put it that way. Like making that, I think it was $8 million and staying there for one more year, getting just some more reps in, I suppose, and working with a team that he's already super comfortable with in a hometown that already really likes him. I think that could not go bad for him. I think, well, I guess hard for me to say, but I don't think that it's going to be a bad move for him. And then he comes up again for free agency next year and he looks towards a bigger market and maybe more money. So while it was interesting to me that he turned down perhaps more money right now, he could potentially be looking at bigger salary for himself when he enters free agency next year.
Yeah, if Juju Smith-Schuster would have entered free agency last offseason, he would have got paid. He would have absolutely got paid, but still on his rookie deal. And then Chase Claypool comes out of nowhere. And I think that's what it was. Once Chase ascended himself and showed that he could be that number one guy, I mean, teams were just kind of doubling Juju and saying, all right, we'll take our chances one-on-one coverage with Chase Claypool. And Claypool had that incredible breakout rookie season. I think that's really diminished Juju. Again, if he had came out a year before and went into and entered free agency, I'm sure he would have broke the bank as he wanted to. But I think even, I would have loved to see him with the Eagles as well. But I think those teams weren't offering him nearly as much as him and his agent figured, coming off of that 2019 season when he was able to do then. And from that to this, now he's not even thought of as the number one receiver in Pittsburgh anymore. I think a lot of people are of the belief that Chase Claypool is going to end up being better than him and being that number one option on the outside. So I think for Juju, you kind of have no choice. Sign this 1 year deal. It's a show me type of deal where you can ball out. And if you do, then you have the opportunity next offseason to potentially get that big multi-year contract that you want.
And Juju's so young too. I mean, he's a guy that, he's like, I forgot how, but young 20s. Like he's definitely,
it's like a 25 or I believe so.
I think he's younger than 25 because I think he came into the league at like a 20-year-old. So at 24, 20, maybe even 23. I think he's like a younger player on the younger side, which I mean, look at what he did last year, still had 97 catches, but just the yardage wasn't there. Did have 9 touchdowns. And just like, again, I feel like you also have Deontay Johnson there with the Steelers. Like they have a really deep receiving core. So, I mean, look, he gets another chance to kind of show his worth. And I kind of want to move over to the Jets because they gave big money to the wide receivers and they were in on Juju. So it seems like they may have would have added him. I did not like the Jets getting Juju. I thought that would have been a bad move just because how much money the Jets have tied up into their receiving position. And, they ended up signing Keelan Cole, which I think for like $5.5 million. But I think the Jets have done good things. I don't want to rag on the Jets. I think Carl Lawson was a great signing. But they right now have almost $30 million this year tied up to 3 free agent receivers. You have Crowder, Davis, and then also now Keelan Cole, and none of them have had 1,000-yard seasons. I just feel like that's risky. And you can tell me how Corey Davis, he's a young guy, great blocker, and like he's a lot of upside. Don't get me wrong, but there's a reason that the Titans let him go, and they're going to pay AJ Brown instead. And that for the Jets, especially maybe if they added Juju because he hasn't had a 1,000-yard season since 2018. All that money tied up to unproven receivers, and Jamison Crowder, he's not bad, but they gave him over $10 million a season. And it's just something that I don't love it, and now what are you going to do in the draft? Will you end up with that 23rd pick, maybe pick a receiver? I know Kadarius Toney will be out there from Florida. I don't think they'll go with the 2nd overall pick wide receiver, but now you're kind of stuck with these 3 guys. And to me, none of them are number ones, and whoever's the quarterback there, I would have liked to see them add more of a star player, especially because they had all that cap.
I kind of agree, but I also feel like for the Jets, I mean, I don't know. They weren't going to go from 0 to 100 right now just because they had like a 2nd pick. I don't think that we should be expecting that suddenly they're going to have all these offensive weapons and they're going to be great. And so, yes, it's a rebuilding season, but that's what I think it is. I think it's just a rebuilding season. I don't expect the Jets to be incredible yet. I mean, I'm just to not be as terrible, And I think that while Keelan Cole is not like the star receiver perhaps that they wanted, I think that he's average. I think that he's going to produce for them. I think that with Jamison Crowder and Corey Davis and Keelan Cole that they're going to be okay. And so obviously okay isn't what you want as a Jets fan. I mean, you want fantastic, but I think that to start, it's not a terrible building point.
At the end of the day, you just kind of have to work with what you have, right? I mean, Adam Gase is gone, but still prospective free agents are looking at the New York Jets and saying, all right, Robert Saleh, yeah, that's a nice name. That's somebody who could be a really good head coach, but will he? That nobody knows that right now. And then the quarterback position, our wide receivers, is Juju Smith-Schuster really going to come to New York knowing that maybe Sam Darnold isn't the quarterback? It might be a rookie, and you might have to kind of, help guide him along. And just all that uncertainty, what's happening, the state of flux that the Jets are in, and trying to rebuild this franchise and be a perennial contender again. I think the Jets, they just have to kind of take whoever wants to be there, because a lot of guys are going to look at this situation and say, maybe they're 2 or 3 years away from me considering going there. But I think right now the Jets, you kind of have to take what you have. And I think Corey Davis is a nice addition. We'll see what Keelan Cole does. And I think for the Jets, though, the top priority for them, though, is addressing the quarterback position. Is Sam Darnold your quarterback or not? Or are you going to look in the draft and get someone there to groom in the future? I think that's their question. I think that's why free agents may be a bit weary of going to New York.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, you look at who they got, and a lot of young guys, because maybe they feel like they'll grow in with the Jets, like they'll progress with the Jets. So I do think that's a great point. And as we're on the topic with free agents, you guys are Eagles fans, so I have to bring this up. Safety Anthony Harris, who I actually really love from the Vikings with all of his duels with the Saints. He picked off Drew Brees a few times. And, he had some amazing plays and broke my heart a few times. But he signs 1 year, $5 million deal. I love this deal for the Eagles. Harris had kind of a down year in 2020, but 2019, he had 6 interceptions, over 90 PFF grade. I mean, he was just outstanding. And the safety position is one of those positions that you don't like to talk about, but like when those big plays happen and you're getting beat over the top, it's just the most crushing thing. And I could tell you that as a Saints fan back a few years ago when that happened a lot. But Andrew, we'll start with you. Thoughts on this signing and really the Eagles as a whole?
I mean, one of the few good moves that Howie Roseman has made in recent time. It's hard to say because Harris is that's great. I mean, he's going to help the secondary, especially with big play Slay and Darius Slay having to go through so much, having to carry the burden on the back line. But for the Eagles, this just really feels like, I'm not going to say a bridge year, but it's a wash. I mean, the Eagles understand they traded Carson Wentz. They're taking that cap hit. So you kind of got to take your medicine this year. You don't have much to work with. I mean, they've restructured some contracts, Brandon Graham's in particular, to save some money, but they're still well under the cap. And I think they're, unless they can continue manipulating it and maybe add a couple of more pieces, perhaps they could be competitive, but Kayla, I have to think that the Eagles may find themselves with another top 10 pick next year. And if Jalen Hurts isn't what everyone thinks he is, then we'll be back to square one. So it's hard to conclude anything, surmise or, bring up conjecture. I don't know. At this point, I don't know what to make. This team, Kayla, we won the Super Bowl.
I know.
4 years ago, what are we freshmen in college, and now, I was a freshman in college. You were not. You're still in high school. But think about that. Before I'm going to leave Fordham, this Eagles team has turned into rubble. They were the team that could have won 2 out of 3, and then where did we go wrong? I don't know. It's tough. The last 4 years have really just been a decline that I never expected after that Super Bowl victory. Just hasn't gone the way Philadelphia has wanted it to. And now hopefully they can rebuild, but it seems like this is a long-term project and something that's going to have to start slowly, and it's going to develop over maybe a 2-14 season this upcoming year, I'd have to think.
They fell apart so fast.
Awful.
It was so fast. It was literally the next season, and then the one after that, done, ruined, shambles. I don't understand what happened. All I know is I was on an epic high, and then I came to college. I was a senior when they won the Super Bowl, and I was like, oh my gosh, it'll be so fun. I'll go to college, and then I'll get to come home for the parade. I had it all planned out. None of it happened for me. So I don't know what happened to them. I really don't know where everything went wrong, and I'm not sure that things are suddenly going right again. We talked about this a little earlier about the new head coach and how that's a little bit of a wary thing for us. I'm not sure how much we We don't
He's
know.
a yes man. Let's call it what it is. That man is not there to change the culture identity of the Philadelphia Eagles. Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman know what the culture is. They want to initiate their template. And Nick Sirianni, he's a yes man. What was that Jim Carrey movie where he decided I'm going to say yes to everything? That's what I'm going to call Nick Sirianni. He is now the yes man. He is Jim Carrey. Congratulations, Nick Sirianni. You are a head coach in the National Football League.
I know. And it's crazy how fast Doug Peterson came in and out. I mean, comes in, wins the Super Bowl. They fire him within 3 seasons. Yeah. I mean, we won a Super Bowl.
He wrote a book, Kayla, Fearless. He wrote a book and he's fired. Come on.
And also, they made the playoffs in 19, didn't they? They made So they made the playoffs in 18. I remember they lost to the Saints. 2019, they lost in the first round to the Seahawks. He 1 year. I guess he gets no leash. I mean,
right. Eagles, 2020, one bad season, and they're like, "See you later, Doug Peterson. We don't want you anymore."
Definitely
I don't know
interesting.
what's going on in this organization. I truly don't. But back to the topic, I think that it's good that they got Anthony Harris. I'm intrigued to see what they do with their number 6 pick. If they decide to go with, I don't know, another quarterback, because we had talked about this a little earlier. There are not that many quarterbacks coming up after this year. And so maybe they will get somebody else instead of Jalen Hurts. Maybe he's not the man for us yet. So I'm not sure how they're going to shape out. And I think with the NFC East just being what it is, it's so disappointing to me that we can't even compete. You know,
can't even take advantage of a dumpster fire.
Not a great division, you know?
They did for a few years though. In 2019, they were still I think they were 9-7, and they made the playoffs. 2018, I'll give you some props there. But again, I think with the Eagles, they're just a very interesting team, because it was 1 year. It wasn't even like this. They were they still made the playoffs a few years. They were competitive, and it just all comes apart. But I do want to move over now that we're now almost a week now into free agency. Can't believe it just really flew by this week. And I want to now talk about the first wave is over. So best available players still out there, still some really great players. And my best available, it's a Saints target. I have to throw the Saints in there. Came out a few days ago, back in, I think Wednesday, when the news initially dropped, but that's Richard Sherman. And I think he's a guy that, there are a few teams. I mean, the Saints are not the only one, but he's a great veteran to have. You put him opposite Marshawn Lattimore or your number 1 corner. 2019, he was so good. Last year, he was hurt a lot. And he was still solid, but was hurt. So, that's going to hurt you. But his last full year, you look at his passer rating against, it was 45.3, which is insanely low, over 90 PFF grade, made a Pro Bowl. And right now, you go to the estimations on Spot Track, and he has a 2-year, $20 million deal. I would love to see if the Saints could somehow work that out with their salary cap situation. They could bring in Richard Sherman. I think that's actually an upgrade over Janoris Jenkins, who recently got cut by the Saints. But he's right now my best available guy, and he brings you championship experience. Obviously one time he was one of the best cornerbacks in the league. I would say not anymore, but still a really, really solid player. And you should be able to get him pretty cheap too.
Yeah, I think that my best available, I'm going to go with Kyle Fuller from the Bears. I'm going to go with him as my best available cornerback. I think the Bears are taking a $9 million in dead cap on his salary, which is interesting to me. But I think that he is a really strong asset. I think that defensively, he's going to be a huge help to whatever team he goes to. So I think that he's someone I'm really keeping my eye on right now.
Yeah, I would go a little bit, not left field, but I think if we've seen anything from what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have done is that you invest in pass rushers. And I think the best available has to be Melvin Ingram out of the Chargers. When you think about the fact that he's going to come on the cheap, he missed the final 6 games of the year. He had a couple down years a few years back, battling injury. And I think right now at this point, a team doesn't have to break the bank or give him a chunk of their cap in order to sign him. And I think in this day's league, you need guys who can rush the quarterback consistently and get there with regularity. I think Melvin Ingram III, he is somebody who can do just that, still young. And if you're a team like if you're the Green Bay Packers, I mean, they don't have as much money, but if you're the New York Jets, you still have some money to work to play with. The Indianapolis Colts, I mean, would you love to have Melvin Ingram III there with Darius Leonard and those guys? That would be an even more unstoppable defense, you would think, ideally. So I would say with the onus being on pass rushers in the NFL, I think Melvin Ingram, for the price that he may sign with, I think he could be a steal in free agency right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you talk about pass rushers and what the Bucs did. I mean, they had Shaq Barrett, who they signed him, but they signed him kind of when he was, I think he had like 1 8-sack season, but they kind of helped him progress until the player he is right now. But the veterans that they got, I mean, talk about Ndamukong Suh or JPP, like they were able to build that, like that, especially that line through free agency, which was really impressive. So, I mean, definitely Ingram's, a great player. And before we wrap up, 10 more minutes, I want to get into the winners and losers of this first week, because I think it's very interesting. I think everyone is very, obviously it's only been a week in, but initial reactions here. So Kayla, we'll start off with you. What's one winner you think of the first week of free agency?
So my winner is, I'm thinking that my winner is the Chiefs. I'm picking the Chiefs as a winner because they have Kyle Long and they got Joe Tooney. And so I feel like those two guys are really key pieces for them that they've acquired throughout free agency, and that they're just continuing to build like capital investment really in Patrick Mahomes and in giving him weapons and defenders and just people to help him out there. So I think that for me, it's the Chiefs, as I like to see that they are continuing to strive for success. Like despite the loss of Eric Fisher and Mitchell Schwartz, I think that they are trying to replace these guys. And I think that they are doing well right now in free agency to make sure that they maintain their status and make sure they maintain themselves as a top-notch Super Bowl caliber team. And so I like what they've done so far. So for me, the Chiefs are my winner.
You know what? I'm not going to go a team. I'm going to go a player. Cam Newton. He's a winner because we talked about the lack of weapons, the lack of defense, the lack of everything that New England had last season. And now Bill Belichick has decided that I'm going to write the biggest check that I can. They've invested hundreds of millions of dollars now in long-term deals. When you talk about signing Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, you get Henry Anderson, Cody Davis, Hunter Henry was the big one, Jonnu Smith. So with those targets now, and I think specifically Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, and Nelson Aguilar, who had a great bounce back season. We kind of ran him out of town in Philly for good reason too, because as that guy said in that famous video, a lot of people out there could catch better than Aguilar at the time, but he bounced back with Las Vegas. Give him credit. He got his money, got to go to New England. And I think for Cam Newton, there's no more excuse. Bill Belichick is giving him weapons. The defense is going to come back better. And I think this is really Cam's last final stand to show that he can be a quality starting quarterback. Because if not, this back half of his career is going to be as a backup if he can't do it in New England with this retooling and this rebuilding. The Patriots should be a playoff team, and it's going to fall on Cam Newton to take them there.
I completely agree. And the Patriots were one of mine. And we were talking last week on this show, and like, we weren't sure if Bill Belichick was going to spend, and we were like, maybe they're not going to build around Cam Newton. And they did, and they're going to give him a shot. And that's why I love this move most, because I think a lot of people give Cam a lot of flack. And I'm a person, look, he's played with the Panthers all those years. I had to watch him play and light up the Saints a few times. And he's a guy that I think he's not going to be that 2015 MVP guy. But if he can put that 2017 level when he made the playoffs with the Panthers, where he was able to run, he was able to, throw the ball well. He wasn't like the best thrower, but he was a solid player. Because even if he could be a game manager plus that running ability, especially in the red zone, I mean, it's really, good luck. And then you add some nice pieces. I love that tight end duo now they have. And the last time the Patriots had that tight end duo, they had, Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, and they were lighting it up. And for, obviously with all what happened with Hernandez off the field stuff, but still when they were playing, really solid. And I mean, I can see something similar with Henry and Smith. And then you talk about the receivers, and that defense, I think, got a lot better too. They bring back Kyle Van Noy too. I mean, like, they were able to, do a lot of great things, and they were one of them. And also the Washington football team, I like what they did on offense with Curtis Samuel. I mean, Curtis Samuel, I really like, and another guy from the Panthers, and he could play everywhere. He plays the slot, plays the outside. He could actually play running back too. So he does everything. And, he's a type of player that, last year for Teddy Bridgewater, he was a security blanket too, which you wouldn't think for a guy that can, be a burner downfield. I think he caught like 70% of his catches on third down, which is like, a crazy amount. And he was really, really successful there. So really like that pickup. You put him opposite Terry McLaurin, who was his college teammate back with Ohio State. I really like those as winners, but now we got to get to the flip side with the losers. There's always losers that everyone wants to talk about. And it could be old takes exposed just because obviously these losers will end up being winners. I feel it's always the case with me. But Kayla, we'll start off with you. What's one loser you think from the first week?
One loser? I have so many actually that I was thinking about. Okay, all right, I'll just name all three and I'll only talk about one. I think that the Seahawks are the losers. I think that Texans are the losers. And I think Bears are the losers. And so I think Seahawks because all of the Russell Wilson drama, and then they haven't helped him at all. They have not added anything to their offensive line. I think they added one person, but they're really not doing the most right now. So I find the Seahawks to be a loser. They're having a lot of turmoil within their organization. The Texans, obviously, they're having a terrible time, especially with Deshaun Watson. And I think Will Fuller left their team too. So everyone's trying to get out of Texas. They're really losing. Nobody wants to come to them. So I think that that's really hard for them in free agency, just in that they have no draw to their organization right now. Like there is nothing Deshaun Watson technically, but he doesn't want to be there and he might not be there. So I think that they do not have a lot going for them right now. And then the Bears and their terrible move of Andy Dalton. They have to be one of the they have to be one of the losers of here. I think that was a bad move. Andrew looked like he was going to contradict me.
No, I wasn't. I wanted to agree with you. I was going to say this. The easy answer is the Houston Texans, but my mom always taught me don't beat a dead horse when it's down. So everyone knows how inept, how awfully run that organization is. I don't have to add on to that and beat them up anymore. But I think Kayla's right. It's the Chicago Bears. You franchise tag Allen Robinson. That's great. But you have Kenny Golladay is in Chicago Wednesday night. It looks like everything is good. He might sign Thursday morning. Then he makes that flight from the Windy City over to the Empire City, and he doesn't want to leave New York anymore. Now he's been there the entire weekend. He's going to stay. Chicago, I think Kenny Golladay went to Chicago, had that meeting, then came to New York, had their meeting here, and he was like, wait, these are two different franchises. The Bears, the Giants, there's two different types of mentalities. I think the Bears are going nowhere fast ever since they traded up for Mitchell Trubisky and not for Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. I think that's a curse on them, something they're going to have to live with. And Gullotta, I just with the lack of moves that they've had, I just don't see it getting any better for that fan base. And I guess they'll still have to look back at that 85 year with McMahon and that defense and just hold on to those glory years because these are not the Bears of yesteryear.
I don't know if you're the Bears. I don't know if you guys saw the meme where it was the Wheel of Fortune, and I think the L was in there. And then they said, I'd like to answer the puzzle. And they said, Russ Wilson. Yes. Said, no, Andy Dalton. I was dropped. Just like, oh my God, this is like, because Bears fans were like so into like, we're going to get Russell Wilson and we kept Allen Robinson and it's going to be all good. So that's definitely for them to only have Dalton out of all of this is, why wouldn't they just keep, I guess, Mitchell Trubisky at that point? No offense to Andy Dalton, but I would even rather kept Trubisky at that point. But my loser is, mine's a salary cap because everyone thought it was doomsday for the Saints, doomsday for the Chiefs, doomsday for the Bills. And all those teams got under the salary cap. The Saints, everyone thought they would have to trade Michael Thomas, Cameron Jordan, DeMario Davis, all their big players. And they got all their core players. Yes, they cut some players like Emmanuel Sanders, Janoris Jenkins, but I think the Saints team will still be, even though they have a new quarterback, Winston Hill, I think they'll be a relatively playoff team. And they were $110 million over the cap to start this season. $110 million, and they were able to get under there. And now they still have their core. So there was that. So that's the one thing, obviously, with the Saints, I've paid attention close. But the Chiefs, Kayla, you said they were a winner. They started over the salary cap as well. And then they basically gave one of the biggest free agent contracts with Joe Thuney. And you look at that and that's someone that they paid for and they used the voidable years and they, were able to bring that salary cap down and they got other guys to add on it. And then you talk about the Bills, another team that was right around the salary cap, and they brought in Emmanuel Sanders, former Saint, and they feel like they retained their whole roster. They have Matt Milano, and like seems like they're gearing up for another playoff run. But I mean, for me, it was the salary cap. Everyone was crying about it, I feel, especially in New Orleans. Everyone's like, oh, they're going to get rid of everyone. And didn't happen to any of these teams. So I think we'll end it on that note, the positive note that every team is now salary cap compliant, and we're ready to go here with free agency and the rest of, this offseason. I really can't wait till next September where we get to see all these guys in their new jerseys. But I think with all that said, it is time to wrap up the show. Special thanks to our guest, PT Isles podcast host and WFUV alum Joe Buono, and then also WNBA All-Star and champion Essence Carson tonight. And then if you missed any part of our show, you can check out our highlights or the entire program on WFUV Sports YouTube, Facebook, or WFUVsports.org. The sports director at WFUV is Bobby Chaffardini. Thanks, as always, to our producer, Alex Wolds, for keeping the lights on. As always, Alex, you definitely are the best. And for Andrew Posadas with the headlines and my partner, Kayla Wentzel, I'm Andrew Gullotta, telling everyone to have a great rest of your weekend. Get some sleep, everyone. One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports.